can hear you, but not us during the pre-roll, and then once it goes live, then they can hear all three of us.
Well,
or 10 of us, depending on how we go with this.
Also, Streamlabs shows me like a setting up your stream dialogue that I don't think you can see because I'm sharing just a window. But that's gone now, so I'm pretty sure we're live.
I don't know if we are or not. I'm still seeing on the YouTube channel a new XR talk. Yep, but not yet.
Oh well, you know.
So it might be that just I'm lagging by like a minute or two.
I think it'll catch up.
Oh, there we are. Yep, we're here.
I've been working on the layout some
more.
Hi,
Paul. Yeah.
I cropped your video feed, and you cropped your hair.
Mm-hmm. I cropped my hair because I needed to make it less of a problem. I hate it when my hair gets fuzzy.
Yeah.
It gets all fluffy. It just
I kind of embraced it.
I hate it.
I kind of embraced it, but.
Well, yeah, but you also hat up a lot too, and I'm not much of a hat guy.
I haven't had a proper haircut since February, so it's been a little while. But yeah.
I think you should. I think for the next show you should just brush it all out. Just like
yeah.
Yeah.
Have was Goku from Dragon Ball Z like just all sticking out.
Yeah,
there. Yeah. So anyway, hey everybody, it's good to see some familiar names in the chat. Took a little bit of a break. Thanks for letting us have the week off last week, and we have a new guest. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
So this guest, which one of us met this guest first?
You did.
I did.
I think you met this guest first, and then you introduced us, and we went, oh.
Yeah. Another Portland connection. So
yeah.
So yeah.
Paul has been the sweet mana of Portland connections for me. It's been amazing.
Well, you're gonna have to pay me back soon because I don't get out of the house much these days. So let's go ahead and bring Jim on. There he is.
Howdy.
Hey, Jim.
Another layout for the people that watch regularly. We've got some circles going on, so hopefully let us know what you think about that.
Yep. And this is not promoted by Disney.
Nope.
In any way.
Wait, what does that mean?
I just chose an appropriate backdrop.
I didn't get it for a second. Yeah, that is. That just happens to be.
Baby.
We are not.
Yeah.
It's a mascot.
We're not technically broadcasting that. I think we'll be okay. Yeah. So hey, Jim.
I can always switch it up. Fly. How's it going?
So yeah, like we kind of said, Jim's in Portland with us. It's really funny. We all once again yet another show where we're all living within a couple miles of each other, but we're getting together
and haven't seen each other for months and months.
We're together online to chat. So why don't you tell us about yourself? Tell us your background and your experiences around the XR space, and I think we are going to talk about. We're using, as usual, we stretch the terms of XR as far as possible, and I think this conversation is going to kind of dip and turn around all those edges, which is going to be super fun. But yeah, can you give us some background?
Yeah, where do we start then? If we go back to it, I think how I got into any of this within kind of filmmaking and post-production and visual effects came about obviously as a career, as a skateboarder and snowboarder, as a professional athlete. And that kind of led into an interest in making action sports films, as they're dubbed today. So just, skateboard, snowboard videos that wound up becoming very recognizable, especially in the industry. So it was kind of going through self-taught of, cinematography.
Well, as an athlete, then you were able to carry the camera right along next to the action, and is that where you got kind of started on it, like holding the camera down low and up, and and skating along with them? Or
yeah, I mean it just started out with first camera was like a Pixel 2000, which was actually a cassette based RCA to the back of the TV like your SNES. And you just re-record over this cassette tape. So it was very analog, and
right.
That was just friends filming each other skateboarding, and no type of thing of like knowing, what, Dutch angles and anything about like the the movies I watched as a kid, everything, from George Lucas and Spielberg and Kubrick and all this stuff to really recognize, like, just being in awe of that stuff, and always having the question of, like, how did they do that, and then trying to
Right.
figure it out. Stop motion. I didn't know what visual effects was. I didn't know what chemical process and plates and all of that was until way later. And
Right.
it was always that, I think, that interest of trying to figure things out that kind of led me to where I am today. It's like, starting off in that career, learning more about filmmaking, learning cameras through that. If I wasn't, if I didn't qualify for, competition or friends, it was always like, well, we'd try to emulate the people before us, the Jacob Rosenbergs, the Stacy Peraltas, the Spike Jones, like everybody that was making,
Right.
skate, surf, snow films ahead of us, and trying to emulate those angles, or that type of cross-process look if it was shot on film versus like high 8. And this is very much in analog days before the big switch over to digital.
Right.
So it was much of like, following your heroes in that, and then seeing them progress out of the skateboard and kind of the action sports world, and see them transition over. So as a skateboarder and a snowboarder, you're like, oh, well, there's this whole other life that you could have in art and technology and filmmaking, storytelling, outside of, this passion or sport,
Right.
as they like to call it. So that kind of led down getting interested into post-production and learning about, desktop editing, and, early days of Photoshop. And when I discovered After Effects for the first time, I'm just like, wow, this is mind-blowing what you can do.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've come way past that in terms of, super old Power PC, even G4 Quicksilvers,
Yeah.
back in the day, or even SGI systems that were, way out of my reach.
Did
In
you
terms
did
of
you
cost.
ever hook up with Andrew Kramer's stuff when you were learning, like
Oh yeah,
the videocopilot.net?
I've known Andrew before Video Copilot, back in the Creative Cow forum days. So Andrew and I are friends, and yeah, he was always, him and another buddy that were on Creative Cow were like the tutorial guys before, like, YouTube was the thing. It was forums back in the day. It was everybody trying to figure out, because that day it wasn't YouTube, it was books. You had to get books. You had to get like, DVDs
with a CD-ROM hot glued in the back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, all that fun stuff, and just dissecting and reading a lot more than watching back in those days. So like the education that you have today at your grasp of learning about
Oh my
all
God,
of
it's
this stuff
insane.
is, yeah,
Yeah.
it's very empowering. It's very
It's funny.
democratizing.
Both Unity 3D and Cinema 4D have relatively opaque help files. They're not super searchable. Like you can't you can't use like quotes around 2 words and it'll
Mhm.
show up only those 2 words. It's like it'll just show up everything that's got and what I'm finding is that probably 90% of the time I go on to Google and I search in my help term for the software that I'm doing to find out exactly what I'm actually looking for, and
Mhm.
then I go and I plug that back into into the help field. But it's the net is insane now. It's there's so much information we can pull out. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
Discoverability is a big thing of, like, you may search for that tutorial, but then you may find an artist who posts work with that particular plugin or workflow in Unity or Unreal or Blender or whatever it is, and then you stumble across their ArtStation page or their YouTube channel, and then it just leads you down another rat hole. So it's like this endless discoverability of awesome
Those are the
kind of
best
awesome
rabbit
bands.
holes. I like those rabbit holes. I like those better than the political rabbit holes.
Oh
That we're
yeah,
going down.
not the Wikipedia conspircy theory crazy
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, Estelle in the chat was like, "What are books?" Because she's a little bit younger,
Yeah,
a little bit younger. But like
it's
I
like this.
kind of went through that too. I mean, like for me, I kind of had similar early days of skate, like the skate scene. It is interesting that a lot of media production came out of skateboarding because not only just like video and the path you went, but like the path I was drawn towards during that period of my life was the graphic design side, and like the magazines were
Oh,
just
it's
so
huge.
inspirational, and like they were doing all this edgy, cool
Yeah,
stuff, and
like Thrasher
oh my
magazine
Of
was
god,
course,
amazing.
Thrasher is the staple that has been around for so long. It's one of the few print publications left. And being friends with a bunch of the guys at Thrasher, it's there's those beacons in um, many of it is skateboard culture. Skateboard culture has influenced everything from fashion to music to art. And you look at how many skateboarders in the industry that have been pro or have had a career working for as art directors, graphic designers. There's so many people that have either been a part of or still are a part of the skateboard culture. Because it has so many cool things about it in terms of like the influences it introduces you to, and there's so many cool people in that culture that it has such a broad influence today. Because I mean, look at how big Thrasher is for fashion today. You can't see an influencer
yeah,
or some social media star and they've got like a Thrasher shirt on or a Thrasher hoodie, almost to a point of like this big kind of commercial movement into skateboard brands being ripped off for big fashion designers using old skateboard graphics from the 80s for their
Well,
for their fashion.
how many knockoff shoe companies make checkerboard bands?
Oh, of course.
Right?
yeah. Yeah. Well, and it also reminded me of like then there was the little bit later part in my life when I got real interested in the programming side of things, and like for me it was like I think I've talked about this in past episodes, but like in a little southern town, the Barnes and Noble technical section was like I would check it weekly to see what new thing was there, and these were like 500-600 page books. They had the CD-ROM glued in the back, and usually out of that giant thick book there was maybe 2 or 3 really valuable chapters, and then between there was the magazines and the computer magazines and the programming magazines that kind of it took a lot of work to find, and like back to your point, you're kind of you're only learning what the people have published and what you want, so now
Yeah.
you can kind of like create your own curriculum almost based if you want to do some weird hybrid of video production and AR, like XR type stuff. You can craft that. You can go down those whatever rabbit holes you want. So it is interesting to see how
Yeah.
accelerated the learning has been. So I wanted to get to like, does this are you at this point in kind of your timeline? Is this where because I knew you were a part of GoPro, right, pretty early. So
Hmm.
is that what this naturally led into?
Well, I'd been friends with guys from GoPro before I'd ever joined, and there was kind of that inside joke between me and a couple of them of like, yeah, kind of when you guys get a real job for me, like let's talk. And I just kept in touch with guys because they knew I was a filmmaker, and they knew I was working in a lot of the synergy spaces of skateboarding and snowboarding, which fit very much in line with a lot of the content and a lot of the market that fit within the GoPro
Yeah.
family. And kind of my ties to the traditional kind of commercial and Hollywood and visual effects. And when they kind of came ringing again, it seemed like an opportune time to kind of get back into a company again and kind of help push things where it would have been awesome to make some inroads in terms of some some new products and look at different areas of kind of capture technology and filmmaking and software. And that was a really great time to be at GoPro. It was a huge learning experience for me, and I think everybody that was there, because I was there pre-IPO and then I was there post-IPO, and there was a huge boom in terms of the products that we're doing. We had amazing teams between engineering and R&D and marketing and social media.
Oh man, you guys came out with the most amazing stuff at the very beginning there. It was like, what? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and still to this day, I still say from a small form factor capture solution, like I still think GoPro is leading the charge. But obviously, yes, they have a lot of competition. There's kind of a little bit of at one point maybe too many products within the SKU line at one time. So it's a little bit of a little bit of focus, but the things that came out of it and the projects we were able to work on, the new things we were able to put out there, in terms of development and technology was, it was untouched for a while. Yeah, there was lots of competition from DJI and Insta360 and all of the, spherical capture cameras that we know out there, because, a lot of them have come and gone.
Yeah.
They're not, there's a bunch of them that are not around anymore. A bunch of them that have pivoted and, they're still trying to, augment their solutions to fit what it is. But yeah, obviously we launched, from single point of view capture cameras with the Hero line to, spherical capture cameras with, Omni and Odyssey and Max and software for that, to get color acquired by GoPro, and then them being able to be a puzzle piece that fits the back end solution for the capture side. Because with GoPro, the cool thing about it was always a virtuous circle of or cycle of, you capture amazing content of your life. It just happened to be that a lot of our people that we worked with were the best of the best in each one of their endeavors or sports or, just lifestyle. And, you capture this amazing content. We publish amazing content captured with these devices. Everybody gets stoked on it. They want to buy the camera and do the same thing. So it just created this really awesome kind of circle there. And that's what I think created the groundswell of why GoPro was on top for how long that it was that it was this whole ecosystem of sharing the stoke of get your ass off the couch and go out and live your life and be able to capture it without having this big giant camera with you. And I
have my favorite Hero camera. Do you have your favorite Hero camera? I'll tell you what mine is if you tell me what yours is.
Sure. A lot of them were obviously baby projects with the team, but I'm still kind of Hero 4, man. Hero 3 Plus and Hero 4 were really cool from a single point capture. But then when we first came out with, because obviously we had a lot of prototypes of arrays and multi-point capture systems that we had, that never became an actual product, that were these skunkwork things that we used, for some partner projects and internal projects. But I think it really shined through with Omni, when that, fully synced spherical high resolution array came out, it was just kind of inevitable, because you're looking at this and people were already 3D printing rigs for the GoPros that were non-synced.
I saw a guy at GDC dressed up as a wizard with one of those on the top of a staff. And he was he was standing there with his GoPro array on his staff, and he was walking around GDC. It was pretty cool.
The people, I'd say it's funny to say that GoPro had fans or still does have fans, but really GoPro would have been nothing without the community. And I think companies try to capture that magic in a bottle, and it doesn't come along for every brand. Obviously, you've got Apple fans and you've got, Sony fans and all that. But like for a camera company to have fans where like everybody knew the world famous giveaway every day at a trade show at 3:00, we were the loudest chanting all the time. And then after we gave you a bunch of free gear, we invited you to come and tap a keg with us. I mean, were you doing that with a lot of the suits at some of the other major manufacturers? Like, didn't matter if it was a camera company or software company?
It depends on what you were out there looking for.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
I was going through my little nostalgia of the skateboarding days, and like I remember, like at the time that I was kind of into it, it was kind of funny in your little group of skaters. There was there was definitely like the one or two people that liked to record, and they were into it. And
that's the filmer.
Yeah, the filmer. Yeah, and I remember at the time, like the holy grail camera was the XL1. Was that Canon? Like the little. It's kind of like
that would have been the VX 1000 and the VX 2000.
Yeah. So it was like had the handle on top, so you could hold it low and all. But it was like it was never marketed for that use case, and they like that not that I saw at least. And it like they're going after like a much different demographic. So
they're going to independent filmmakers and broadcast.
Yeah, so you have you have a company that like takes advantage of Moore's law and has miniaturized and brought a higher quality, but it understands the use case, and then when you market that appropriately, and then you're also that's the magic mixture of also realizing that you're as much of a media company as you are a camera company or a product company, and letting like helping people publish their work. I've always been also fascinated by Red Bull, right? Like it's like then the amount of content that Red Bull puts out is just insane. Like and at the end of the day, their product is energy drinks, but like
sugar water.
They're just, if you're into action sports at all, like they're in everything, like they're everywhere, like, and they have events and but I still assume their main revenue is pushing the drinks. But
yeah, it is. And I mean it's a lot of the content that we did. We were partners with Red Bull Media House. I've worked on Red Bull Media House films and have a lot of friends there. And it's a Red Bull Media House is a behemoth of not only spinning out new technology, but all of these different content verticals. And it's crazy to think about the amount of athletes that they have signed to them, that they've branched outside of action sports and gone to racing, mountain biking, like
into outer space.
DJ, I mean, we haven't talked about the jump, Baumgartner's jump. Who how many GoPros he had on him for that jump.
So before we keep going here, I wanted to tell you my favorite GoPro is the GoPro is the Hero Session. It's the Hero Session, and I swear to God, it's a 4K camera that's this big. And it goes underwater. It'll go 90 feet underwater, and it's this big. And absolutely, just 10, 15, 20 years ago, a 4K camera that would go that far underwater would cost you $500,000.
Oh yeah, the housing for that thing alone would cost you a pretty penny for something like that.
I had two of them on my trip across America to move to Florida, and then when I went to Budapest, and I was all over Europe and stuff, and I brought it with me, and I am so glad that I did, and I'm so glad I just had this thing in my pocket, and I could pick it up and just take some 4K video of anywhere I was, and
it's inconspicuous. You wouldn't get stopped at a public place that normally not let you have a camera. And to think that you had this, people would think GoPros were toys. So many times I'd be in a place where they would be like, everybody else wouldn't be able to have a DSLR or a big ENG or a cinema camera. And I'm there and I'm like, I'm capturing all of this in 4K. Yeah. The 24.
Holding a pack of cards, right?
Yeah. And they think of it, they don't take anything of it because they're like, oh, it's a GoPro. It's, it's just this little toy camera. That was the hard thing too of, I think why I was brought into GoPro at that time was to also help change the mindset and the perspective of artists and professionals to use GoPros, other than thinking of it as the action sports cam or the crash cam as it was being used in Hollywood at that time. Right. And going like, hey guys, I come from the world as, as a DP, as a visual effects artist. Like, we're talking about lens distortion profiles and being able to hand that off to a VFX studio. Normally, a person at some of these companies wouldn't be able to talk authentically about, big high-end production and post-production workflows. So, a lot of the projects that I was able to work on were really interesting, and I think it helped push things along with GoPro being seen more as a viable solution.
Might be getting down into the weeds a little bit here, but so when you guys were selling GoPros as crash cams and as portable, B, C, D unit cameras, did you actually figure out what the lens distortion profile was and like hand that off to those teams? Like, did you have kind of a pro package that you would like tell people all of the info about the sensors and all that stuff and kind of give them LUTs and stuff like that for the camera?
There were definitely some special projects that we worked on. For most of it, though, if we didn't,
I'm sorry, Paul. Now we just look like cock and ball.
Well, we look like Mickey Mouse before, so
upside down.
We couldn't unsee the Mickey Mouse ears.
I like this better. Actually, this is like we're supporting our guests.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm working on it.
There were before the GoPro developers program, there were definitely some little bit of hand holding and a little bit of firmware and IQ charts and things like that were shared. But for the most part, if it wasn't on the GitHub and especially when things like the acquisition, when Dave came over and we acquired Cineform and a lot of that stuff, I think there was a big push to be able to share that information with people and be able to help people with that, because you did have docs. We did put that information.
Yeah, when I was first using a GoPro to do camera tracking, I was using the GoPro footage for camera tracking, and I was like, I actually spent about 4 or 5 days back in 2008 or 9 or whatever it was, trying to understand what the lens was and what the sensor was and stuff, so that I could track
it. Your pain. Yeah. I know. I mean, those days of using PF Track and Synthize and
Synthize,
of getting, because most of that stuff in Synthize and Nuke and PF Track and all of that stuff is like you had a little bit of profiles already in there that you could load.
Yeah, there wasn't one for my camera.
You had to figure out the math, and with GoPro early on, you had to unwarp the image and then rewarp it back and add the deformation after you did your track, and it was a pain in the ass work. So, but we did come out and help some people after the fact when we had a bit more support on the kind of engineering and support teams of like being able to share that, because we knew professionals in post-production visual effects and production in general. It was very helpful to get that information out there. So today it's still out there. There's support docs. You can go find some of the things out there. Dave is still at GoPro fighting the good fight of like being able to share that information with people that need it.
Yeah. So we're about to hit the 30-minute mark, and I just want to kind of shift gears a little bit, and let's talk about some XR stuff. So
let's fast forward into
I mean, we were kind of getting there already. I just want to because we could talk. By the way, Engage VR in the chat. I saw I could talk about skateboard stuff, the early days of skateboard stuff.
Do we have a skateboard?
Yeah, he mentioned 411, and I was like, oh, with Lance Mountain, but no, we're not going to talk about that stuff.
That was my first paycheck, by the way.
So you
401 PM. That was my first actual realization of like, wow, I can get paid to, make films and work on it. So yes, big shout out to my buddies Josh and Chris and Todd at 401 who sent me a paycheck, and some of my footage wound up in a video game.
That's awesome.
And in 411.
Well, so
it's kind of fun.
my if I had to tell people what 411 VM was like, this was still in the VHS days of video, and what they had figured out was like skate shops and stuff were just running TVs, and we were constantly playing videos to get hyped and stoked, and so they came up with a format where they were releasing a tape, like a magazine, and so they called it a 411 VM video magazine. And
subscription
based.
And
it was early days of subscription of a video, and so it was like this way, because back in the day, like we didn't have access to like just YouTube or just any Instagram, the just daily content. And so it was like a new video would come out at the skate shop and you'd have to snap it up, or somebody else would get it, or what most people did, grubby skaters with no money, would just hang out at the skate shop and just watch the videos at the skate shop.
Yeah, or their friend would buy it and everybody would get a dub.
Exactly. So
because skate videos take a long time, and I mean obviously social media has placed that forefront of just how quick content is consumed today. But back in the day, it would take years for a team video to come out. A Powell video would take Stacy a long time. It was a lot of work. It was these multi-year projects that would be the big to do, and then there would be the video premiere, and there would be all the hype in Thrasher and Transworld and Slap and all these magazines of like, okay, here's the hype for the video, and then the video would come out, and they would make a lot of money on these videos, selling the VHS and the DVD copies. But then, internet came and dubbing and BitTorrenting and all this stuff, and
disrupted that.
The market fell out of the bat. Yeah, 411 and on video were ahead of its time.
So Engaged. There you go. We did a little skateboard nostalgia for you. So I assume your first, since you're like I was saying earlier, we're kind of getting there anyway. We're starting to talk a little bit about 360 video and stuff. I assume your earliest kind of toe in this water was the VR side, because like 360 video kind of goes hands in hand with VR in a lot of ways. Is that true? It
was earlier than that. I was doing pre-GoPro days because of visual effects and cinematography. We were doing multi-camera plates ahead of time, and I mean even before I was getting into stereoscopic, kind of in that late 2000s era when stereo panels were being marketed and thrown down our throats of like, hey, we're gonna do passive glasses, and you guys are gonna have either passive.
Everybody will need to buy new TVs because it's the future.
Yeah, and that the stereo days are still a knife in the heart of like workflows and figuring things out and shooting with beam splitters and.
How did that ever get like greenlit? I mean,
the studios and the panel makers.
Holy crap! It's like it just makes no freaking sense. You walk into a room, and it's like, oh, I'd like to watch this show with you, but you only have two.
Well, I think.
Things
as a consumer, what I observed was like the like television display, like the innovation for like the first 20 years was about getting flatter, more clarity, lower power, like just faster, cheaper type of thing. And then we went through like projection displays and all that stuff, and then we finally got to flat. We went to flat tube, and then we went to flat screens, plasma. When plasma and OLED hit, and it was like, okay, it's HD. It's not going to get any flatter than this. And like everybody was really happy with the quality. I think the panel makers were like, we're getting diminishing returns on like the specs.
Oh shit.
Yeah. So let's start adding more intelligence and more features. And for whatever reason.
Oh my God. I still am trying to kill my television.
The smart TV.
From like connecting to trying to connect to the internet all the time. I'm
I don't connect my TVs to the internet.
I unplugged it, and it's still like, hey, I smell your Wi-Fi.
But yeah,
and I'm like, no, fuck off.
But I got a TV with like active shutter. Like you could there was a period of time where you couldn't buy a halfway decent TV that didn't have like glasses of some sort with them. You know, it was like
Well, they just came, you know, and it was like the Toshibas and all the other ones that were there. Yeah, some of it was definitely gimmicky, a little bit painful within those days, but
okay, so into the AR, XR, VR thing. Do you guys know what the standard focal distance was on that?
The stereo separation.
If they were stereo, what was it? What was the optimal distance?
Well, it really depended on what you were shooting, and you know, it was like if it was a TV, it was like the minimum was like, you know, it was like, you know, it was in feet, and it depended on the content and the panel maker, and you know, if it was passive or active, and you know, the scenes were all different because a lot of the heavy stuff from like, you know, Avatar and a lot of the films that were shot natively stereo versus post-produced stereo, lots and lots of roto.
Which is way better natively.
Yes, it is. Yes, and that has always been true.
Makes my head hurt.
Yeah.
You know what? Actually, I really loved that about how Cameron did the stereo on Avatar, because like he didn't do the whole Vincent Price House of Wax, you know, thing. Like he didn't overuse it. And
why do you think Pixar never did it? I mean, if they couldn't, Pixar was in that same route of like, if they couldn't do it the right way, they just weren't going to do it, which is why you didn't see those films coming out.
Hold on, just so everybody can kind of like keep up, like when we're and this is super relevant to the XR side of things, right? We're talking about stereo,
like the process of the timeline of like to where we are.
Yeah, so when you look at something in like a good VR headset today, like when you look at something in a Quest or a good AR headset, like a HoloLens or a Magic Leap, there's two video sources, there's two video displays. One's presenting to your left eye, one's presenting to your right eye, and it's trying to approximate the same difference in perspectives that you naturally get from your individual eyes, because that's how we perceive depth. And so what you all are talking about,
and one of the beautiful things about the Magic Leap is that it has multiple depth planes.
Yeah. And, well, that's an additional cue, right? So we're talking about there's two primary cues as
talking about depth.
Yeah. So there's two primary cues as humans that we use to perceive dimensionality and depth. The primary one is our left eye sees stuff at a slightly different angle than our right eye. And then, so that kind of gives us a sense of depth. And then when our eyes go to focus on that same point, that common point, that's the depth cue that we're talking about, which I think is secondary to what I call the stereo cue, this left-right eye separation. So I didn't want to derail you guys too much, but I just wanted to, what you were talking about just before you were about to go down that road was, when you're recording video in stereo, there's kind of two primary approaches. One is you literally have two cameras recording a slightly left and slightly right of the main focus, or you record from a single source and you do some post-process tricks where you warp things slightly in one direction or the other to approximate that, because our eyes aren't really that far apart. But
right, and you do a whole ton of rotoscoping to cut the foreground, the midground, and the background out.
So what do you what's the industry term for those kind of two different workflows? You said, is it post and source, or?
Yeah, so there's a native capture.
Okay.
In stereo, you're using like, you know, a hyper stereo rig or a beam splitter.
Okay.
And you've seen these monster beam splitter rigs on set, pictures of them all from, you know, any of the big tentpole films or commercials that were shot of that. I mean, behemoth rigs, they were gigantic. We just shrink it down, and then, you know, probably one of the first test beds of sync for GoPro was the GoPro stereo rig. And that was the same technology that allowed us to sync multiple GoPros, which then came later in the line for like Omni and Odyssey, and even later down the line for, you know, kind of for Macs.
Got it.
So it's everything's had been shrinking. So in terms of today, like capture technology has shrunk immensely from what it was 10 years ago. You know, render technology has sped up tremendously. You know, it's like, you know, today we talk about render times. We're talking about real time, where we're not waiting for rendering to happen. I wish it all could be that way and everything could be real time, and you didn't have to wait for any post-process stuff. But we're still getting along this line. So looking at, you know, timelines of how we're getting here to talking about, you know, the mix of creating CG assets and mixing those with live action to get, you know, experiences for mobile AR and, you know, virtual production and this whole mix, because it really is, we know it's a big umbrella of all these different disciplines, all these different technologies, software.
It's massive, dude. There's so many different little
It's
pieces.
confusing for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's confusing for most people.
Well, it's confusing for, you know, for people who are actually in the industry too. I mean, there's so much of
well,
it,
and that's
you know?
that's kind of the point of the show, right? Like, so like our primary focus is people that are looking to build a career in this space, or you know, all the different spaces that this encompasses, but also a place to talk about the nuts and bolts of these things. And if you're enjoying this conversation, you should like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm done, and you may carry on.
I wanted to kind of like wrap a little bit about the concept of virtual production, because I know that you're deep in that right now. You know, my experience as a real-time 3D game artist, then going to an XR AR company, was that they hired a whole bunch of people from the visual effects industry who assumed that they could just do their visual effects and it would be awesome for real-time 3D. And they were wrong, and we had lots of fights and stuff. And but what I'm seeing is that now, with the advent of super fast GPUs and really fast computers and all of the stuff that Unreal is doing, that those CG assets can be decimated a little bit, and we can do some cool shader work and make it actually real time, 60 frames a second, and you can do like, you know, you're sitting in front of a scene from Mandalorian that was done with, you know, what, like 80 or 90% virtual production. So you know, I think it's a really cool thing. It's good. I'm glad that the VFX industry has embraced this real time thing.
Can we define virtual production real quick for everyone?
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's really a mixture of like I said before, of disciplines and production. So you have it based in the roots of broadcasting technology, high-end, you know, multi-point capture technology, 3D rendering, real-time game engines powering a lot of this.
I'm sorry, you got to define multi-point capture for me.
Okay.
You said that a couple of times.
Multi-point capture would be like multicam. You would have multiple cameras on a set, because you have.
Okay, right. So then you're fading between camera A, camera B, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So virtual production has a lot of its roots in live visuals, you know, live stage visuals, you know, DMX synced to, you know, being triggered assets that are CG created. So you have, it takes a village to get this done. If you looked at any of the BTS on Jungle Book or Mandalorian or any of even live stage, live projection mapping stuff, all of them take from these different disciplines.
BTS means behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, so like we've kind of hit what's enabled this is a few different things, right? Obviously computing has gotten faster, real-time graphics have gotten to a level of quality that is acceptable, if not on par with even a few years ago. Then there's like the reason why this is XR related is the process of virtual production. A few of these techniques actually utilize some of the same tracking and devices and things that you use for VR tracking or AR tracking. So like, you know,
Your mobile phone and HTC Vive tracker.
yeah,
You're using, on I think that's the thing right now. We're saying is like educating people into how these work, how these workflows get put together, because they see Mandalorian, they see the big stuff, on Netflix and all the blogs and Variety, and they go, well, that's unobtainable. I'm not at ILM with Stagecraft. I'm not at the Future Group. I'm not at the Mill. How would I dip my toes into this stuff? And the good thing about it is, because a lot of these technologies are democratized today, is that you can get a GoPro, you can get a DSLR, you can get access to these cameras and some of these, I should say, lesser expensive technologies to build out and kind of rapid prototype an idea, to test things. And from the independent level, you can get things done that are totally deliverable for your own projects. It's happening on a sliding scale in terms of budgets and the equipment. Yes, if you're doing things with giant 70-foot by 20-foot LED walls, you don't have millions of dollars to do what they had done with multiple vendors on Mandalorian. But you can use screen technology, testing it out on your laptop screen. Most MacBook Pros today are OLED based. Most screens that come with your gaming rigs today are OLED based. You could get Unity, you can get Unreal. They're free to use. They're free to learn. There's tons and tons, almost crazy amounts of tutorials and tests, and people sharing information on how to get started in kind of this, like, the real-time XR capture, for this stuff. Even like DIY volumetric, a vol cap, if we're talking about it, because that kind of falls in that,
oh yeah,
that same space of, yes, it takes a lot more cameras to do vol cap, but if we're talking about, multiple cameras being able to capture in that, Spence and I, and Paul, very well, it's like what you can do with your iPhone today for photogrammetry, is amazing.
yeah.
It's not a big barrier.
It kind of
to just mess
it
around.
reminds me of, actually, back to the evolution of skateboard media conversation, where there was a period of time where you had the huge, like, well-resourced companies producing this really nice looking, top quality media. And then now, God, what, 20 plus years later, you've got someone that can meet or exceed that quality completely on their phone in, immediately. Like like what used to take forever to produce and plan and process and all that is now just like almost it's almost no cost to get into. And so like, I also, this is also for my sake too, to connect the dots a bit more, like, just so folks know where we're talking about why game engines are being brought up, is like, if you were to shoot, like, well, I guess Mandalorian's come up a couple times. So my assumption is, based on what you both have said, that Mandalorian is known for some of its virtual production techniques. But like, so to shoot Mandalorian, which was like a series-based, episodic, seasonal, normally like that type of media is like lower quality. It's got to be shot faster, cheaper, all these things. Like, to get the level of quality that the Mandalorian is today, 10 plus years ago, it would have been a Star Wars movie where they spent months and months, years,
and tens and tens of millions
finding
of dollars,
the locations, planning the logistics, getting all the people there, setting up all the rigging, planning the shots, making sure you got the shot, then all the editing. So like, to summarize, like, virtual production in my mind is like using this real-time 3D stuff to basically say, wait, we don't need to, we could actually create the environment completely virtually at a high level of
Or
quality.
change,
Yeah,
or
and
change
we
the time
can,
of day, change the
yeah,
sky, change the time of day, like things that it's not a silver bullet. Virtual production is not a silver bullet. It is another set of tools and technologies to enable
Right.
storytellers and filmmakers to address some of the issues that prevent traditional production from being able to do it. If you were thinking about, you know, Roger Deakins talked to Greg Fraser, who is the DP on Mandalorian recently, and it's a really good podcast that Roger Deakins has. And you know, one good example is like being able to shoot sunset in a magic hour over multiple days it's a feat unto itself.
right.
You know, to do that, if you're shooting one scene, it could take 7 days over, hoping that you would get similar lighting over this whole time.
On every day, right?
Yeah, and everybody knows sunset isn't always the same from day to day. You know, it changes, like something.
Well, and so, Jim, what's the answer? How do you fix that?
Virtual production.
No, describe that. Specifically, around the Oblivion shoot that we were talking about earlier. Like how would you, like, let's say you have like 7 days of shooting that you need to do, and it all has to be at magic hour. It all has to be at the same spot on the planet. How do you do that, right? Like in virtual production, as opposed to waiting for 7 exactly the same coloring and lighting and clouds and everything days.
Well, the great thing is about it, you know, director, art department, DP, visual effects supervisor can all get together and, you know, based off of storyboards, based off the script, because it all starts at the script, is, you know, you can look at what that mood, what that lighting is supposed to be. If you had, you know, reference frames, you had reference images from a sunset in Malibu versus a sunset in the desert, you'd be able to recreate that photoreal and be able to put that world up on the volume, the LED volume, and have that
what's
as
what's the LED volume you're talking about?
So that's basically your space. Is if anybody's seen the pictures from Mandalorian or gone to like a live set, you know, Tomorrowland or Coachella or any of this, and seen these gigantic LED walls. The volume is basically, it's a volume of light.
Where you control
space.
the lighting within that volume.
So basically think of an LED wall as your light source. You know, that is the great thing about it with under virtual production is there's certain things that you would be limited to in terms of shooting. You know, if you're shooting on green screen or blue screen, there's certain wardrobes, there's certain things you stay away from, reflections, you stay away from, you know,
glass,
hairstyle, anything that's opaque or see-through, cars.
Can I break this down for our listeners real quick? There's a Tom Cruise movie called
Oblivion.
Oblivion. There we go. And it's a lot of the scenes are in this cloud house. It's this impossibly tall spire with a house on top of it, and he's got a spaceship. It's a really cool movie. I like it. But the direction was to have it in this house that is completely covered in reflective surfaces and glass, and it's like constantly, you know, like the camera's moving through glass. It's moving
touchscreen interfaces.
Glass. There's touchscreen interfaces. There's all this cool, you know, like tech, and then it's also in the clouds. So the traditional way of doing that would be to shoot it on green screen and then run through like 500 visual effects artists as they each died because they had had enough, and rotoing and trying to pull all the green out and magenta the green screen away. And so what they did was that they put up a 360 degree camera capture on top of Mount Haleakala in Hawaii, and they shot for like 7-8 days the sunrises, the sunsets, the starry sky, they just shot the environment for all this time. And then they had all of these cameras gen locked together, and they were able to then rear project those onto screens around a full-size cloud house thing with all the glass and stuff in it, and then just shoot with the natural light. They had hardly any lighting at all, as far as I understand. I mean, they basically shot it. Of course, they needed to like maybe bump a little light somewhere, but mostly they used the light from the screens to shoot the piece, and that's what you're talking about. So
yeah,
I will
and it's bred out of a lot of those, rear projection, even front projection techniques from way back in the day, because those approaches, obviously we talked about it.
Hitchcock. Right.
Yeah, Hitchcock, pioneering that. Lots of early visual effects with stop motion, Ray Harryhausen techniques, Phil Tippett, like all of those guys were like very big pioneers, even with early days of ILM and the Dijkstraflex and MoCo, motion control robots and things like that, has all bred out of like the necessity of these things did not exist. So filmmakers and technologists came up with all of this. And, with the Oblivion, the cool thing about it within virtual production is that being that those plates were shot as principal photography, and those background plates for visual effects is, today it would have been harder even back then if, Joe Kaczynski was like, I really want this section of the clouds to be more over here. And, the process to even do that, where in Unreal, moving an environment around is basically, the lead tech viz artist just going, okay, let me just orient the camera around. Let me shift the background.
Or let me move that particle system, and now the cloud is over here. Right.
Yeah, or if you're grabbing some assets, in there within the engine, it's so easy to audition the assets. Oh, you want the mountain to be this much more in the mid plane than you do in the foreground? Oh, we need to add. Right. Yeah, and it's really cool to watch the behind the scenes of this stuff, how real-time interactive the game engines allow you to change things up in these environments, which was very hard to
and just another kind of explainer for our audience. Now, instead of shooting for 8 days on top of Haleakala, you've got an Unreal artist who builds this equirectangular render of the entire environment, and your camera has a Vive tracker on it, or some kind of tracker on it, and as it moves, the game camera moves. And so as I'm moving around the person who's there, backlit by the LED wall, it's appropriately correcting for parallax and moving around, which is like, I love the fact that and this is just me, but I love effects artists are having to worry about polygon count.
Spencer, did you ever get the XLab demo at ILM, the iPad demo?
I was not one of the cool kids. I was never invited to.
Because now I'm going to talk about how I got to see it. But to me, that was my. So what I wanted to. And it's public, like they've talked about it because it's a few years old now. But so at XLab, they had an entire Star Wars scene done in real time. They were using like a customized version of the Snowdrop engine, I think. And the cool part was they had an iPad that was being 6DoF tracked. They weren't using AR tracking. They were using either Vive tracker. I think the version I saw predated the Vive tracker, so I think they were using like IR balls or whatever. But basically, they would hand you an iPad, and first there was the final scene projected on a giant screen in front of you, and you got to watch like the director's version of the scene. And so you're like, okay, that's cool. I heard a little story. I saw some visuals. And then they hand you the iPad and they say, put the camera wherever you want it. And you can scrub the timeline because all the audio's recorded, everything is completely real time and virtual. And then the cool part is then they obviously, it was a good demo because they had all these canned tricks they would show you, which is like,
Yeah.
hey, actually, why don't you put the camera in this room and start from the beginning? And you actually get the same exact scene plays through. It's all the same data playing through. But because you planted the camera and in that example, also the microphone, because you're listening from the perspective of the camera, you get a totally different story because you're now listening near where like the stormtroopers were versus where like the, you know, the rebels were or whatever. So like, and it was, and you could scrub it and it really opened up like once you even like, so I have a couple of questions related to that. One is like, is the idea, it takes a lot of money and investment to build all that up in real time to where you can arbitrarily go to any perspective or point in the scene and get
Right.
something out of it. You won't get it out of every spot, but is the idea that the investment it takes to build a scene fully out like that to allow that freedom of movement and freedom of direction is basically a wash compared to if you had recorded this practically using, you know, real actors, real cameras, real environment? Like, is it on par even budget wise? And then my follow-up question to that is, it was a cool demo, but is it at the end of the day, is that a final consumer experience, or is this just a really powerful previs tool for them to say, okay, now that we've played around with this, now we're going to go plan the actual practical version of this for the final production?
Or do they actually use that as footage?
Yeah. So or is it? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It can honestly, it can be multiple. It depends on the project. Is that a lot of this stuff in virtual production also was born out of the previs area of, you know, having low poly renders that allowed you to work around a CG environment for directors, for storyboard artists, for, you know,
Like with Real Steel.
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah. That was the Hugh Jackman robot fighting movie.
So were they known for
from years?
They did a lot of virtual previs for. Oh wait, our friend Swin worked on that. Okay, gotcha.
Eric Geduldick's brothers.
Digital Domain
did that
Yeah.
part. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of that stuff for, you know, previs being used to kind of sell the story to the studio to approve the green light to go like, well, how are you going to accomplish the Matrix?
Yeah.
And previs was done normally by sketched out storyboards or, you know, just big, you know, elaborate, you know, panels that were just helped to get the money to actually go and shoot the live action versions of those, as opposed to today where, you know, previs has matured so much that the previs is, you know, essentially being, you know, rendered out in real time, coming to the final render,
right,
if you will. So it's like, you know, if you look at a lot of the behind the scenes from a lot of films that used it today, you're going, hey, that's not that far off from the final render.
Right.
Like these guys, like, you know,
you could ship the previs as a product.
Previs years ago would have been, you know, very crude render, just because they're trying to portray what the action is, what the story is, what the actors and the settings can do. Nowadays, you know, the previs is so close to the final renders in some cases that the environments right there, it helps the actor or actresses who have normally been looking at a tennis ball or looking at a green screen. They're actually able to interact with the scene in virtual production or with the potential CG actors and actresses themselves. We haven't even dove into digital humans of like, it makes it more believable because the actors and actresses have something to play off of. Like, you know, if there's a problem.
I think that this is a really good thing that this is happening. I also think that it could possibly pull some creativity out of the
we both had the same we both had the same thought at the same moment, which is like normally when you work with when you're collaborating creatively, You have to know when to show enough detail to get everyone to buy into the idea, but not to get everyone obsessed with the implementation you're presenting.
With the details,
So-
right? And because
Yeah.
and so like I watched the behind the scenes kind of making of the Brad Bird's Incredibles,
Mm-hmm.
and I watched him pitch The Incredibles, and the way that they pitched it is they had a whole bunch of storyboard artists who made basically the whole movie in storyboards, and they were just like blue line sketches, and he was up there, and he and one of his co-producers basically stood up there in front of the execs, and they just acted it out, and they were like raising their arms and yelling and like what, and they were doing all this
And you've
stuff.
got the animatic playing behind them in the theater, and
Well, there's no
just a point. They're just pointing at a storyboard and talking real crazy, right?
They're pointing at a frame, and they're like, and this happens, and then they throw that one down. They got the next one. They're like, and then this,
Well, the passion of the pitch.
Yeah.
In there.
Well, exactly, and that's what I'm.
Are you giving
think
too
that-
much concrete presentation to where you're eliminating room for interpretation and creativity? Like normally
you could totally oversell on it because they go, oh, but I remember that was the shot and it was pretty much done, and you guys
right,
changed
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
You guys showed me this in
Right.
pitch, or we saw this in previs. That could totally happen where you sell an environment or you sell a world, but then are you locked into that world because whoever greenlit the project or the budget or the client approved it as that, they bought into that within the pitch, and they're like, oh, but I thought it was going to be this. So
and if it's not perfect,
this
Jim, if it's not perfect, if it's kind of close, but it's still kind of looking a little chunky, they may have something in their minds that goes in a different direction than you are planning on taking it. And
that's
so
why
that,
communication to a client is always important.
This is
Never
some career
never
advice for
oversell.
creatives. This is all career advice.
Never oversell on that, because it's I think it's happened to everybody on projects too, where it's over deliver, under promise type of thing, where it's like you want to hold back some of the magic and wow the people at the end of it, than to just kind of put all the eggs in one basket and go, oh, it's going to be like this, and then that's how you sold the idea.
And there's no clear answer to that, right? It's always like you present enough to get approval, and you leave yourself enough room to. It may not turn out as good as they have it in their mind's eye at the moment, or you may come out way better, and like. You gotta. It's this very. I've never really thought about it, but yeah, you've got to read the room a little bit, and it's very.
I would say to all of my contractors out there, definitely leave room for one or two changes, and then after that, like build your contract so it makes sense, so that if someone comes back to you and says, "Oh, well, it's." This isn't what I was thinking about. Like, okay, that's great, and you have one or two changes because of the contract.
Yeah, and it's different if it's an RFP that's coming into you that already has maybe a creative idea, you pitching your idea to someone, where somebody may have a creative within an RFP that comes in and says, hey, we want you to do our creative and collaborate with us, versus you're really good at ideas and art and technology, we have a rough idea of what we want to do, help us figure it out type of thing.
That's where we operate. We don't build other people's ideas.
I try to. I mean, well, I think personally, my approach is to help the other party become comfortable with what their goals are. So like. I don't try to interpret
what are you
them.
trying to accomplish?
Yeah, and if they get over prescriptive in what they're looking for, you do have the ability to say, well, let's walk that about, like, what do you like, why do you think that's important, without being condescending, and without like, you can have a creative,
you have to ask why.
yeah,
You
and
always
like,
have to start
and
with
I'm just,
why. Why
and
do
you
wanna
always
do
frame
this?
it, yeah, you always frame it as, I'm just trying to figure out what you're ultimately trying to accomplish, because there might be multiple ways to get there, and maybe you're just thinking of one, and people are generally open to that, but yeah, like I only want to editorialize the goal and the approach. I don't want to dictate it, because like I assume the person that is in the position of hiring me to help them with something, they've already got they're the expert in the problem space that they're trying to execute within, and they've identified what I do as a potential solution. So I don't want to over assume, but I do want to understand their goals. And so that is an interesting, and it does, I mean, this is all related, right? Like when you're talking about pre-visualize, and then you also, you're running into this slippery slope, like Spencer and I did these aquarium exhibits where, very similar to the film and virtual production thing, where at the time Monterey Bay Aquarium literally had a prop shop in their facility where they were making exhibits out of wood and plaster and animatronics, and like when you're building an exhibit, that shit better be fully planned out, because once it's done, it's done years. And there's no changing it. And so when we engaged them doing their first digital exhibit, they were like, oh my God, we need to have a 4-hour meeting to talk about what fonts and colors we're going to use for this. And we're like, what? No, we could change that. We can change that after it launches if you want. Like, and we had to demo that to them to show them how possible that was.
Right. One of my favorite pieces of that was that we were building this 9-foot or 7-foot flat screen touch wall, rear projected touch wall, and we had all these little plankton pieces. And we needed to build each one of these little pieces of plankton in really, really detail, and lots and lots of great colors and cilia and things moving around it and stuff. So each one was relatively complex, but Paul also needed to be able to build the touch interface, and we needed to have some kind of flocking, and like they were floating around randomly, and you touch them and they zoom out. And so there was an interactive piece of it that we needed to get running kind of quickly so that Paul could continue to tweak it and make it look cool. And then as he was doing that, I was working on each one of the pieces. So I built these little kind of like super cubey little, kind of representations of each one of the types of plankton.
Kind of like white boxing, a little bit nicer version of white boxing, right?
Right. And then we showed it to them, and they were like, no, oh my God, we thought you were good.
Yeah.
We
sent your white boxes through scientific review, and it didn't pass. It's like, yeah, but that is an interesting, like, as far as virtual production goes, like, it does bring up.
But it's not just for media and entertainment. It's just that media and entertainment have always been pushing the forefront into these technologies for film and TV and broadcast. And I mean, we haven't even touched the other business use cases or verticals that kind of virtual production, real time, XR, all this falls under, because it does touch science and education. It does touch, product launches and discoverability, and it has so many use cases outside just film and TV shows.
Well,
it's.
So like I'm still thinking about this, like where the magical creative opportunities present themselves sometimes. Like whenever we do, so like how many times in your career when you're working in film and recorded media did a shot happen that was totally accidental? Maybe it was like a side camera you had set up, or it was like a B-roll or whatever, and you're like, holy shit, that's good. And I could have never have planned for that. But it's like,
the spontaneity.
Yeah. Like, so does it just shift that around a little bit? Like, or like, you know what I mean? Like I think about the constraints of the media, like you talk about when you had to fully plan out the shots, and when you plan out a production, a practical production to detail, there's still going to be those moments of like, oh wow, like that actor did this one thing that we could have never told them to do.
The happy accident.
Yeah. So like, does it shift where those can happen, or like, you know what I mean? Like, cause you're no longer, what you're doing is you're lowering the overhead of generating the moments. Like you're actually giving yourself the ability to possibly iterate more and possibly find those moments more frequently. But then I can't imagine how many like world famous filmmakers there have been that are known for like certain scenes where the like secretly maybe that they were like, well, that just kind of happened and like, I'm going to run with it. But like, does virtual production move that around?
It can confine you, but then it also can liberate you. And it really, I guess it is project by project. Like every director is going to approach something differently. You know, a Christopher Nolan will probably approach something totally different than, a David Fincher. Both two amazing directors that have a really good grasp over story and using visual effects and in camera and being able to direct people, because it's like that. If you get a director in a room like a Scorsese versus somebody else that's maybe a little bit more familiar with visual effects and how that director directs the talent, where they will let a take continue that actors can kind of ad lib and do what good actors do. If the day is running out on a shoot and you're trying to capture this, especially if you're shooting an exterior shot, you can only have so many lights and so many shoot hours to be able to do that. Whereas like on a virtual production set, you can come back to the same lighting, to the same scene, and you have multiple chances to go at stuff or to try and audition things, versus like shooting the sunset 7 days across.
It seems to me too, Jim, that you would be able to, like the director could say, I just thought I wanted like a really dramatic upshot on this character. And they can just bring their virtual camera down there, get the upshot, and say, you know what, actually, without the sky, because that's going to be actually harder, we're going to put something else back there. So just switch the dome to green screen.
Yeah, that's what I meant by iteration. Like if you're a direct, like if you're intuitive and you spot a potential opportunity for like happy accident, virtual production almost seems like it gives you a tool to kind of zero in on it and be like, oh, you know what? Actually, it's not. It sucks.
That's the great thing about Unreal is that you can pull up a tracker marked green screen right.
Oh shit!
Right
You
in
can
there.
Probably just put the green screen in the frustum of the camera. And
no, that's exactly what you would do in Unreal. Is
moving around on the. Oh my god.
That's exactly how it's done today in Unreal. You want to be able to pull that up within the tool set. You have it set aside. You can change the distance of the tracking markers within the frustum and be able to have your green screen. One of the flexibilities of virtual production is to be able to go, we need a green screen right now. Well, we're not going to break and have, Grip and Electric set up a green screen in the background. You just pull it up.
Yeah, you just push a button and it's green.
It's there. Yeah, that is that opportunistic flexibility that if a director VFX soup or it calls for it, you don't have to strike a set or a scene or anything like that. It is, you just call it up within the engine.
When I first got on board with Magic Leap, we went down to LA for something with someone, and I forgot who it was. But we went to one of the studios that Cameron did the the virtual cam thing, where he first did it with
Simulcam,
the Simulcam.
Yeah.
And I got that hang on to it and kind of see how it worked and stuff. Was he
a lot of you have optical trackers hanging off the camera?
Yeah, it was it was a shoulder rig. It had balls all over it and stuff. was he the first filmmaker to really kind of like take that into the mainstream?
Yeah, definitely Avatar and simulcam within that kind of mocap virtual production workflow was definitely a lot of things were pioneered on Avatar. Even to this day, of the new avatars being shot of like simulcam 2.0,
which is sadly going to be a little bit later.
Yeah, he put out that note of the hiatus of sorry folks, it's not coming December 2021 because of I mean, we haven't even dove into why virtual production and XR has like gotten such a shot in the arm lately because of the pandemic. It has gone, hey, we can't shoot actors traditionally. We can't do certain things. We have to think of things in different ways. Yeah. What can AR, what can VR, what can virtual production allow us to do under these certain circumstances? So you have a lot of people looking at what is a remote collaboration shoot look like that is virtual production. You know, what are the tools that you can use in Unreal Engine, like multi-user, to have artists and directors and art department in different parts of the world, but collaborating on a scene at the same time. And I think
how do you sync that though? I mean, it's got
all done in multi-user. It's all done off making sure your server and your multi-user server does not go down during the session.
But even right now, your mouth is not moving as fast as your voice is. So I mean, like, we're
still hoping that ISPs just give us more and more bandwidth without charging us an arm and a leg.
Well,
so yeah, I mean, a lot of our workflows are at the beckoning of the ISPs, what our upload and download is. Because if I'm sending real-time data packets to a server and I'm expecting, you know, when I move an asset or I'm, you know, pressing play on something, that you guys would then be seeing it in real time on your end, you know?
Right.
So there's still lag. I mean, you know, the technology is really, really good and it's advanced very far. It's not perfect. So yes, there are still frame delays. There are still buffering.
It'd be great if you could, along with time code on the recorded video, if you could also record lag from each asset, and then be able to,
you would have your offsets. You could totally do that to figure out the offset. Yeah, there are tools, and you know, there is math that you can figure out the offset of, you know, the frame drift, or, you know, if you're using, you know, a digital cinema camera, you know, lining up all these pieces of gear to make sure everything is in sync is a job unto itself. So,
well, that kind of reminds. I did want to bring up that you worked on the Blackbird project with the mill,
and that was my deeper kind of foray into what the capabilities of Unreal Engine were.
So that was with Gary Bradsky.
Well, yes, I want to. So everybody, so you can just search the mill Blackbird project, but the idea was a car platform that used computer vision to basically turn the car posts into whatever type of car you wanted. And like, that's a real simple explanation of it. So like, I don't know, Jim, you want to kind of
real-time car commercial, you know, with an AR aspect of having, you know, a kind of simulator let you audition whatever Chevy car it wanted to be. You know, it was that particular one was called The Human Race, and it was a project between Epic Games and the mill and Chevy. And you know, there was a lot of release stuff that's now in the engine today.
Cool. And it was what Spencer was talking about was the original head of perception at Magic Leap, Gary Bradsky, who is the founder of OpenCV, had started a new company that participated in this project, where they had basically built we're going to bring it back to skateboarding again, a car platform that had marker. It was tracked. It was a tracked car.
Yeah, visual tracked.
Yeah, visually tracked car. And so...
so you knew at all times where the camera was. And you knew at all times where the car was.
Yeah, you knew the pose of the car, and you had all its movement. It was almost like a hybrid of...
You also had like a equirectangular 360 camera,
spherical array to deal with the real-time IBL lighting.
So I actually
for all the lighting and the reflections, right?
So it starts off with recording video of the car of the platform. It wasn't really a car. It was something you could
It was a chassis
yeah,
that
chassis
had
with
a
markers on it.
movable.
It was
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
I would love.
But
to
like, but
drive
yeah,
that
like
around
again,
Yeah.
if people are interested in that, feel free to search it. So you recorded video. So you're recording video of that. You can obviously extract the pose of the car in the video frame based on the
Well, it's
markers.
all going real time.
Yes,
It's all going
that's what
real
I was
time.
getting
So
to.
it's-
So like, and were you also doing telemetry on the camera that was recording? Like, so you start with video, but really that just generated a data set for in Unreal, or did it go a different way?
Yeah, so obviously there were multiple things going on in terms of technology of that. You had the mill stitch, which was being able to stitch the environment coming out of the spherical array in real time, coming into the engine. Gary's technology with the team being able to track, having the fiducial trackers coming in, that data coming into the engine. So you had, we had a cane that had a camera that was always pointed at the Blackbird car, which you had multiple streaming technologies coming in, because streaming data from the frag computer boxes on the car to the camera car back to the base station. So there's a lot of different pieces of technology coming in there, and you're sending all live data packets back and forth from
Right.
The real-time lighting for the IBL lighting, reflection maps, all the stuff in real time being streamed, over different technologies.
So just to kind of bring it up a level, what that meant was, if you were standing out on a mountain road and the Blackbird chassis drove by, but you were looking at it through a screen,
Through an iPad.
Yeah, you're actually seeing a very realistic rendering of a different car taking the place of the physical object that's coming through. So
So think of it as the chassis was the framework, and then you were able to basically have any type of car be put on top of that chassis and be tracked real time, and you'd be able to audition, you'd be able to change the color, you'd be able to change what the car was, because the wheelbase of the physical camera, the car could change. It could emulate what a smaller size car would be or what a bigger one would be.
And that's and like, again, I go back to my other earlier thought around like people, you have to do projects like this to kind of get us down the road further. I mean, the idea would be eventually, if this were productized a little bit further, would it
take
be
out the car and put anything else in
yeah
there.
yeah
Take the root of the technology, it can be anything in that environment. Whereas like in virtual production, in a lot of these different type of technologies, is you can take bits and pieces of the technology, from the capture to the world building to the game engines, and be able to use it in different ways within these projects. So if you were limited into an environment, you couldn't get a whole crew to go over to Hungary. Well, if you have plates and you had a drone team, they can go over and scan the environment for you. You can retopo on top of the environment, and then have almost like a set extension be off of that, in the engine, and be able to do that in real time. Yeah, there it is.
Yes, Ben.
And that was the early one. That was the early one of the Blackbird.
Right.
And Gem Effects is the company that actually built the chassis of the Blackbird. Those guys are awesome. They can they can build anything and blow anything up. So those guys are super cool.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, the mill still has like a total page dedicated to it.
Yeah, exactly. Because it was a mill project of being able to do this in conjunction with Epic, because it was the core of it was Unreal Engine.
Oh, cool. They have so Spencer sent me a link. They have a behind the scenes now too of all that. So there you go.
Yep, there it is. There's a fiducial trackings. There's
there's all the
the
markers.
red array on top of it.
See,
There's
I want to drive.
LiDAR.
That's my new car, Paul. I'm gonna
That's
get
fine.
that car. Yeah.
As long as you don't pick
That
me up
thing's
at the
tight.
airport.
It's tight.
You have to
It's all-
drive with me, though.
Yep, and that was right at Gem Effects. That little kind of like half seeing what the final would be on top of the track chassis was right outside. That was during one of the R&D tests at Gem Effects. But,
so the blue car is rendered in Unreal, and then
so it just dropped the opacities to show you like the hybrid style of what the render looks like.
Right.
But
Pretty
it
cool,
was
dude.
some very, very talented people working on that project, and the people that I got to meet from there, obviously, with the team, with Ken Labrie and all the team at Epic on that, and the teams at the Mill, Gary's team. There was a lot of people that came together to make that thing in time for SIGGRAPH, and it was awesome. It was a lot of cool things to learn on that.
Well, at some point, we're all going to be able to go to SIGGRAPH again. It'll be amazing, and I'm going to see you there.
Virtual for the near future. I mean, we just had CES has gone digital.
We've talked. I'm fully on board with the completely virtual events, and Spencer needs his people.
I've had enough trade show time that I'm okay with skipping a couple shows, because I've done NAB, SIGGRAPH, IBC, Mobile World Congress, Photokina. Those are years of my life.
Yeah.
Pre GoPro and at GoPro.
I mean, maybe someday I will miss and savor the like overpriced hotel bad cheese Danish, but
but it was always the fun thing of going out to get a drink with someone, get dinner after the show ended, or like meet up with somebody in between the show and you grab a coffee you meet early before the show. So that's that whole thing that we missed.
I never went. I haven't bought a GDC pass in years, but I would be in San Francisco during GDC for the past 2 or 3.
For the after.
Well, just to meet people, everybody. I know they're there, it's it's.
That's another industry that's been decimated, and already the talks of like, how do we use virtual production in XR for all the stuff that needs to still get launched.
The Snapchat Partner Summit this year. If you all haven't seen it, so the Snap Partner Summit 2 years ago was on a Hollywood lot, and it was cool, and you got to see a lot of people in person. But this year, they basically did the keynote, and it was cool. They used the Snap AR tech to make the keynote a kind of a virtual production. Like if you watch it, they're very
WWDC.
Yeah. Oh, right. Exactly. Yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah. Just recently. Yeah. So it's kind of virtual production.
Greg running up the stairs.
Yeah. I mean, it's we talked about this a little bit in the warm up. Like we don't like to get too pedantic around terms and all that, but like for me, XR and augmented reality, I mean, really what we're using is technology to either either digitize the physical world or vice versa, like make the digital world more physical. And so we're pretty embracing of all those things. And I think it's really cool to look at how I like that we had the conversation around, okay, great. This tech enables us to like no longer be constrained by the logistics and the expense of a practical set, possibly, or a camera rig. But does that bring us more creative opportunities? Eventually, does that bring the budgets down? Does that mean will it become democratized eventually? Is that the direction?
It will. I think there's ways to get it done on the kind of, I would say DIY level of, do you get a Vive tracker and have some base stations and hook it up to a camera and get your VCam going in Unreal Engine today? Sure. I mean, that's a great way to get started in this. And I think there's a lot of interest in, people going like, well, what's the minimum specs of a PC I need to do to run Unreal, and what camera should I get, and do I go after a Index, or do I get a Vive Pro I, or what can I do with a Quest? There are pieces of technology that are out there today that are accessible, that are the right fit. Some things aren't. Like Quest is not today the solution for virtual production. It's more so that fits in kind of the Vive Pro I, the Vive Pro area, because of the Valve technology of the tracking. And then you move to the high-end stuff, where you start talking about NCAM and Moses and Future Group with Pixotope and the stuff that is very still in the professional land. But there's ways to get started today that you can jump on this stuff. You can find equipment on eBay and Best Buy. And
I mean, honestly, there's I was looking for it earlier. There's a guy on Twitter who did a virtual production thing with a green screen, his girlfriend, and like this, very, very, very small stage. And she was on a Lazy Susan, for lack of a better.
You're talking about Ian, the Blender guru?
Yes.
He's up in nowhere, Washington, putting out this amazing stuff.
Amazing. And there's this kind of dystopian cyber world that's this woman walks out of an apartment, and she walks down. She gets onto.
She goes down that little lift.
Where is that online? How do you find it online?
He has a YouTube. So it's Ian Hubert. He's a amazing artist.
But this is exactly what you're talking about. This is accessible by
that world building talk is one thing, but then if you look at some of the crazy things that Ian has done, that lift one is on his YouTube page, but his world building in Blender talk at like a Blender Fest is he's like a mad genius. He does real stuff.
Oh wow.
And so one of the things I was thinking about when I was watching that is I saw another one that was done by a couple cats down in I think they were in Brazil, South American crew, and they did this thing of these two people having a conversation up in this big tall structure surrounded by a sci-fi world, and the way that they had a 70-inch plasma screen TV that they just put.
That was basically their LED stages, and they're like, have this TV, let's throw it up behind us.
And they set up the shot. They put the scene on the screen behind them, and they shot it, and then they moved, and then they shot it, and then it worked wonderfully. It was really cool.
You can use this stuff on a kind of very
you don't have to spend $1 bajillion. Right?
No, you can. There are Robert Rodriguez approaches to this stuff, and yes, there's still a very big valley to get up in terms of certain things being accessible. But
tell me his name again. I'm sorry, Jim. One more time.
Ian Hubert.
Ian Hubert.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just do Ian Hubert and Blender.
Yeah. So the one talk that Jim was talking about is actually on the Blender channel, but if you just search Ian Hubert YouTube, you'll get all the good stuff.
There it is. Yeah.
He's Pacific Northwest guy too.
That's funny. We're all up here in the Pacific Northwest.
I want to say he bought like a church and turned it into a studio.
We have one of those in Portland, actually.
Yeah, we do. We got
what was that trippy church that was down
That's what I'm talking about. X Church.
You're up on X Church, right?
Yeah. He runs actually I'll reach out to him. So we've got a really great spot here in Portland called Open Signal. If you go to opensignal.org. And he runs the VR XR curriculum there, where they're looking at, again, kind of the whole theme of this conversation's been like the interesting moment where the high bar of production of media and expression is defined by what the technology enables. And as that technology becomes more accessible, It's what's interesting to, like, everybody likes to talk about how, democratize the technology can become. But another part that I don't hear a ton of people talk about is, well, what does that mean for the people that are always pushing the bar? You know what I mean? So, like, yeah, I can shoot something on my iPhone 11 that rivals what was shot 10 years ago by a professional studio. But what does that mean for those people that were at the what are they working on now? Like, what are the things that are pushing the, like, where is the bar being raised that will eventually be democratized back to us? And
They're waiting for Apple iOS.
yeah, well, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I think maybe that's what's interesting. Maybe that's why people are so obsessed with, like, XR, because because right now XR is hard and expensive to get into. We have found this interesting community of people that are kind of scrappy polymaths and DIY, but like
you kind of have to be. It goes back to the same way of, like, how did the big film stuff get done? It took people to experiment. It took the Spielbergs and the George Lucases and the ILMs and the Pixars and the Steve Jobs, and you can go down the line of tons and tons of men and women that have contributed to the kind of democratization of all of the technologies. Because it's like, you look at, even from a capture standpoint, how expensive digital cameras were when they first came out. Like, the first Sony camera that I had was my first digital camera, and that thing was super expensive, and it was like maybe pushing a few megapixels at that time.
I worked at a newspaper where we had 2 Apple Quick Takes locked in a vault, and you had to sign out for them with your life. And I think,
oh man, we're taking
I think they took a 320 by 240 image to start.
No,
people don't know that Apple was in VR long ago.
We shot a whole ton of the San Francisco skyline and a lot of our textures with a quick take for San Francisco Rush in 1995.
I still have an original quick take in the box, original everything. It's sitting.
You do now.
That's a college fund sitting somewhere.
Yeah.
I have an unopened Magic Leap ML1.
Well, that'll be. Let's see. Wait, how old is?
I think my Q take.
How old is that quick take camera? Like 25 years. So, in 2050, Spencer, maybe that box will be worth a lot of money. So don't crack it.
But how can I honestly, like, say that if we go to our homes or studios or whatever, how many development program boxes and HMDs and things are now collecting dust? I like donated and got rid of a bunch.
I don't hold them dear any longer. I used to try to keep that stuff, but what's that? It's blurred out because that's your Windows WinMR headset.
The mixed reality one, and it's the only one I can actually get onto to PC stuff with. So,
well, actually, you mentioned this earlier, Jim. Like, if the Quest opened up their peripheral tracking, would that make it a more viable virtual production platform? I mean, and they're obviously their walled garden of software, but just assume you can sideload stuff. Is it?
Yeah, it could. I mean, it's not particularly the right answer for virtual production. I mean, that's still why I think you've been seeing the big hard to get has been, Vive base stations have been sold out. I mean, anything has been gaming wise or VR has been sold out because of the pandemic. But I think the huge uptick in everybody being at home that has gotten into virtual production or XR or gone, hey, in my normal, life job has been changed. So you had all these people jumping into going like, maybe I should finally learn about VR or AR or virtual production. And, I think that's why a lot of things were still sold out. I mean, I don't even know how long the wait is for like Valve indexes. It's probably huge wait still.
So Jim, what's your, I mean, I know you're working on this stuff. Do you have a rig at home? Do you, what's your rig?
So the rig is based off of HTC. It's a Vive Pro I. It's base stations.
Storage powered by G-Tech, I assume.
Of course. of course. Yeah, and a custom. Would I still love to be predominantly based in, Mac world, and I still love OS 10, and I love the sleek design, and I'm really looking forward to Apple's putting its card out there in terms of AR. I think we've been waiting for them for years, and they're going to disrupt that as well. But from a artist standpoint, I've been very unhappy with Apple in terms of choice, in terms of upgradability. It's just like everybody knows that heavy
for
lifting.
VR, there's no option.
It's not.
Yeah, there is no
It's like
VR workflow.
The workhorse has been for me. It's been either custom built PCs. It's been HPZ studio systems. It's been MSI Dell laptops, HP laptops, like custom frag boxes from Puget or Falcon Northwest, or it's just the expandability and the plug and play that you can do, even though Windows drives us all nuts. You look at it the wrong way, you get a blue screen of death. Incompatible drivers, like that was always the thing about having that under the closed wall ecosystem of Apple just giving everything to you, and don't worry about the drivers, and don't worry about
it just works. Right?
Yeah.
Well,
for the part.
It mostly works, and you're less likely to get.
Does not work right now on my MacBook Pro.
Well, the other nice thing is like I have a HP tower that I purposely bought to run a Vive, an original Vive, and now it's 5 years old. But because the requirements and the spec were so high, it's still a decent PC now. Like I couldn't run I couldn't run Alex on an Index at ultimate quality.
But if you wanted to upgrade that HP station,
yeah, for sure.
You can,
right. And honestly, I probably it's running a.
Where's the graphics card?
Yeah, it's running a 980 Ti, and I'm pretty sure I could just put a RTX in it, and it would be fine. Like I don't need to necessarily
just have a bigger power supply.
I don't necessarily need to upgrade the CPU as much.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff, when you're doing the high-end virtual production, 3D rendering, real-time stuff, it does take, sometimes some beefy systems and a little bit of investment into it. But, the cost of some of what these PCs, you look at the HP Z line and the Creator Books that just dropped some new stuff. Lenovo just dropped some new stuff. Dell did. I mean, they're blazing fast. You get mobile Quadros in there, you get RTX 2080s in there. It could do a lot off of a laptop. Obviously, for a lot of the virtual production stuff, you need video I/O cards, you need multiple graphics cards for sync, especially with NVIDIA. You do still need a tower for a lot of the heavy lifting of that. You need fast storage, you need fast either fiber or internet ISP coming up and download, because you're sending large packets.
So since Spencer's apparently gotten sucked into Slack, Steve.
Well, no, the new renders are done.
Steve, Steve in the chat wanted to know if you're excited for the new Tony Hawk THPS.
Of course I am. I mean, and Skater XL just dropped on Steam. It came out of beta. That's just like another skate game. EA has said they're going to do skate. I mean, we haven't talked about just how much of the gaming industry plays into the XR virtual production stuff outside of the game industry.
Oh, yeah.
It's just that over the years, game studios have been buying virtual visual effects studios. You have all this stuff. I mean, games have better storylines than some Hollywood features.
Listen, guys, we almost let a whole XR Talk episode get past us without me mentioning Fortnite, but here we go. Like you talk, like the
back to the virtual.
Well, yeah, right. The Travis Scott event in Fortnite.
The live visual.
It's a production that was a linear. It was a linear song, but like the participants were in real time. I mean.
And that's only there's more and more of these.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Actually, funny side story. I saw the Travis Scott stuff, and then Diplo announced he was going to do an event in Fortnite. So I told my wife, because she doesn't understand how much time I spend playing games, And so I was like, hey, Friday night, there's this Diplo event, and it's going to be really cool because look at this. Hey, look at this Travis Scott event. Like, it's crazy. The world changed, and like you transformed, and you got teleported, and he's performing, and all this stuff. And she's like, okay, cool.
She's like,
no. She's like, cool. That sounds cool. I'll watch it. So I loaded up Fortnite on the iPad and I AirPlayed to the living room TV, and I'm like, she's gonna finally see this other side of this world that I participate in, and she's gonna see this cool like Friday night Diplo concert. And it was the lamest. It was a live video feed, I think. It was definitely recorded live. I assume it was broadcast live, and it's Diplo in his living room, it looks like. And he's just on this flat screen, and you're in the normal. They have this non-gameplay world, the island, and you're on the island, and you're just it's like looking at it's like a virtual drive-in movie. And she was so unimpressed by it, and
you're like the first one.
I actually had to like bring up YouTubes of the Travis Scott event and show him. I'm like, this is what I thought it was going to be. It's
the other one
back to setting expectations.
Keep an eye on is all of those, like the Steve Aoki and Deadmau5. Like the crazy thing is those guys kind of in that world of like the live DJ sets and electronic festivals, they're so used to the real time. They're so used to Notch and Touch Designer and live DMX and in terms of the lighting and reactive to the beats and all that. These guys have been doing virtual production in XR without the labels of it for quite a long time. And then you have somebody who's very tech savvy, like a Deadmau5. Like, he will get in on Unreal. He'll get his hands dirty just as much as any of us would. And he knows how to talk the talk on this stuff. And he's on a lot of the private Discord and channels and stuff, and rebel rousing. And it's really cool to see an artist at his level just fully grasp this stuff.
Speaking of,
Paul and I just we just
the Unreal Project.
There you go. Paul and I just talked with a group that wanted to do a virtual Burning Man camp, and it looked.
There was a network.
Right, and this was along the same lines. They had they had an artist and a performer, and they wanted to pump that up and have this. It was too early.
There's those synths picking up.
Yeah. So anyway, this is another place where it's not necessarily app driven, and it's not necessarily HMD driven or screen driven. Like, it can be all three, and this is a place where
multi-platform.
Your world and our world is kind of starting to, a little bit.
It for sure is. I mean, if you've been in this game for a while and you've paid attention to and you've had a good finger on the pulse, you could tell that all of these worlds were converging. And everybody was just like, oh, well, VR is this, and AR is this, and mixed reality is this, and virtual production is this. It's like, well, you're trying to label a movement that is still moving. So it's kind of pointless to, classify and say, oh, well, 360 video is dead. I mean, you still have.
Well, remember back in the 90s, they called it convergence, right? It was like, yes, when the internet
not to be confused with stereoscopic convergence
or digital transformation. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
God, I would always go to like the talks or the trade shows and all of the kind of marketing people and the some of those like big CEOs and stuff that were giving all these buzzwords, and you just like you would play kind of buzzword bingo every time they say it. Take a drink.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
Exactly.
It's like how many how many times would somebody say 3DOF and 6DOF and spatial and immersion, and we've been on enough panels and been to enough of these immersive talks and trade shows over the years to just just laugh at some of this stuff.
Honestly, that was the motivation for this show we do. Was like there are very big name people in our industry that don't actually touch the stuff; they just talk about it. and like,
Yeah.
And
we're here to talk about it and help people figure it
every
out.
week, Paul, I get followed by and or accosted by people who are influencers in the XR industry, and I love them, and I'm glad that they're pushing it out there and stuff. But there's also a
Yeah.
level of like, you need to be able to do this stuff and actually
I
be
just don't
doing it.
I just don't know how you can,
you know?
at a certain, like,
It's
you,
authenticity.
yeah,
you can't really
you can
about
talk breathlessly about the future and your 5G AI blockchain amazing
Which
future.
was the first 6 months of our job at Magic Leap.
But like at a
but-
certain, but to really, to help people navigate the only way you can help someone navigate this difficult, fragmented, weird stuff is to walk the path yourself, I believe. And
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
that confidence of being able to talk about the tool set to a client, a director, a CMO, whatever it is, and be able to kind of break down this deep, very technical at sometimes solutions and go, well, you know what? Maybe this isn't right for your
Yeah.
product,
Yep.
or maybe this isn't right for your live event, and not try to sell somebody a bag of goods that just will not be the right thing for them. Like, virtual production is not the silver bullet for everything, and AR is not, it doesn't fit for some things.
Yeah.
It's like each one of them still needs to find its right thing. Yes, it can fit a lot of different like areas and verticals and business use cases and entertainment uses, but sometimes it isn't the right fit, and you got to be able to kind of be in check with look, you you don't have the budget to do the Mandalorian at that same
Yeah.
level, or you could approach it at this level and be able to do it. And if you don't have a kind of a world view, stepping back from it to go, is this really doable? How can you sell an experience? How can you build a company or sell services to people? You'll find yourself in kind of
Yeah.
knee deep in some shit. of trying
Back
sell an
to
experience
this is
wrong.
more career advice for creative collaborators. You so earlier we talked about setting expectations and calibrating to the goals, and then the other part of it is being authentic and trustworthy, because you may not get this job because you're being real with them and saying your expectations are out of line with what's possible with the resources or the constraints that are presented.
Right.
And I'm telling you this because I don't BS you.
get much more
Yeah,
respect.
and
You get much more
let's do a
respect
good
to
project
say no to
together.
a
Let's
job.
do a realistic project together. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've turned down quite a bit of jobs because I felt that it just wasn't right for the medium,
Yeah.
or it just or their approach just sometimes I don't vibe with it artistically or whatever it is. And yeah, who
Like
wants
that
to
one
turn
that-
down work, especially now? But
Right.
that's also the thing you have is like being okay to say no to some work if it
Yep.
does not fit a couple of different buckets. Obviously,
Like that
I've
one,
seen
like that
during
one that you and
COVID.
I did down in California.
Yeah, that was
Well, that sometimes by the other move, which Spencer and I have done many times, is you're like, this smells like there are obviously potential opportunities that you're just like, no way. I don't, either the way this person is presenting themselves or their like, this is just red flags all over the place. Then there's those in between ones where you're like, well, maybe they just don't know enough about what's possible, or like,
and that has to do with education.
yeah. And like, we talk about this all the time. Like our half our job is education, but then there are those ones where you're like, something feels like we're about to potentially step on a landmine, but it's not.
Right.
It's not so bad that we're immediately going to walk away. Like, we need more information.
You know what?
we need to know more about the person that or the people we're dealing with, and so then we just way overbid it. So then we're like,
Well, okay.
Yeah.
If they're willing to pay,
I want to actually address this
Purposely
one,
scare them away, Spencer?
this one spot that Jim and I were in. What, like 2 months ago, something like that. It was right when the pandemic started out, and there was a company who shall remain nameless that makes things that fly, and we were asked to come down and set up a multi-camera telescopic camera, also ENG run around. What?
We had to track objects that move very fast.
Also, we had to track objects that would move very fast. It's basically like if you were going to go out into the Mojave Desert and do a video with really clear footage of a missile test. And a horizontal missile test, not a vertical missile test. Mm-hmm. And so, like, we thought about it, and I started kind of going on the lowball side of it. And like, okay, well, we could probably do with this, and like, get 2 drones, and we could get rent one camera with a big giant lens, and then I got Jim in on it, and we're like, okay, yeah, we could maybe do that. And they're like, okay, well, and we're going to need it there, and then upping the program. And so eventually, Jim and I were like, okay, how would we do this if it was actually for a Hollywood production company? And we came, and we were like, okay,
yeah,
so that's the deal. And we built this really killer, scope of work, and we maps and circles and arrows and elevations and all that stuff, and I really put a lot of time into it. But the end of it is that we're like, yeah, it'll be $250 million.
I mean, well, that's an interesting that's probably a bigger conversation than what we have time left for. But like, that is an interesting, like we were talking about earlier about like reading your client and reading the room and trying to understand how much education you need to do, how much expectations they have, and then but the problem with that, but basically it's an empathetic approach, right? You're trying to understand who you're dealing with. The downside to that as a creative kind of work for hire is you will tune your bid and your estimate around how much you like the person or how much of a budget you think they have or how much you need the work. And so
that's the openness too of working with the client, the producer, the CMO, whoever it is on the other side of, if you want to have a successful project, you have to have a partner or client that is wanting that as well. So they need to be open to sharing as much information. Like, the ones that are coy is when you kind of go, this is probably going to be a lot more work, because it's like pulling teeth to get.
If I can't even get the requirements to discuss the project with you, how hard is it going to be to get feedback from you?
Is this going to be destined for mobile? Is it going to be for YouTube? Is it going to be for, do we need to do a custom white label application? Like, if you have to pull teeth for a lot of that stuff, that the project is likely going to be a little bit more difficult than that. So you should kind of base your bid, because 9 times out of 10 you're one of 6 or one of 10 bidding against each other. You may or may not know the other people.
I asked them directly, and if they can't tell me, then we don't do it.
No, but I was going to.
What's your bid? What's your budget?
Yeah, well, right? Yeah. So Spencer is good about talking brass tacks at the appropriate time.
You kind of have to. And that's, like you said earlier, that's a bit of the back and forth of feeling out the person on the other end or the team on the other end, and going
you don't want to be a dick, right?
You have to just say, like, and I do the same thing. You kind of at a point have to go, well, they're not going to give you a specific number.
Yeah.
Like, what window are we working in? Because that window always changes. So if they say, hey, we've got X number of dollars, you either know they have more, or they're really being frank of it, or maybe they come back to you after the bid and they go, well, it was just cut and we have $50,000 less than this, so we need to rework the budget. So it's this dance.
A couple of things that, like, so one thing that Spencer and I have done lately, or mostly Spencer, to be honest, as we've had projects to evaluate, we first kind of estimate on if everything goes really well, And then I've noticed, I don't know if you've even noticed this, Spencer, but like when we talk about it, we call it the back and forth. We're like, well, we could probably get the first pass of this done, but assuming that there's a couple back and forths to get us more refined. And so
There's always room.
yeah, and so then we I think the back and forth is this very nebulous metric based on what we sense about the client. And so like
Right.
we might be like, well, we like this person. They seem to kind of know what they talk about. They're talking about all things go well. There's no surprises. And then there's always padding, right? Because there's always surprises, or if there's not surprises, then that's room for the happy accidents or making things over delivering. But then there's also like back and forth. And
Yeah.
especially on a fixed bid, you go ahead and say, well, you're going to want to, you seem like the type of person that's going to want to like have a couple points, a couple notes, and then we're going to want to iterate on it. And then the other thing I was thinking about another thing on our estimation or how we bid stuff. What was that? I lost track of it.
Well, you always have the template that you build out on how you bid these projects.
I know what it was. Like when so there is this dance around. Usually there's a meeting or two where you try to get as much information about what they're wanting to accomplish as possible. You're also feeling them out as how they are to work with and talk with. By the second or third meeting, you're starting to get a good sense of what the scope of the work that you're signing up for. And Spencer, I think we've done this a little bit, but we recently had a project that it's been an ongoing conversation for weeks and is now a signed up project. And what was interesting about them was Spencer brought up like, is there budget for this? And they're like, yes, there's budget, but they wouldn't say how much, right? So just another kind of little tip for a creative negotiating this stuff. If it's kind of awkward or they're not being super upfront or they're just afraid to throw out a number first, a good tip is to do orders of magnitude. So like in this case, the client did it. We didn't do it, but the client was like, so we've now met 2 or 3 times. What's your sense of the budget of this? And Spencer is like, well, we did a project recently that's kind of similar to this. And it's kind of, in this range. And she was like, are we talking about like, I'm just making up numbers. She was like, yeah, are we talking about $50,000 or $500,000? Like if you need help, like if it's uncomfortable or not comfortable for you to talk about money, you should at least set orders of magnitude expectations and be like, look, like based on what you've told me so far, I feel like this is going to be a $50,000 project. If you're assuming that's going to be a $10,000 project, then we might as well restart the conversation or say it's not going to work out. If you were anticipating it could be upwards of a $500,000 project, it could get there, but first let's make sure that you're comfortable with where we're currently talking.
And let's understand what we're going to get you for $500,000 too, because that's a big giant.
Well, that's your deliverables. That's got to be covered in a really solid SOW. But I would say if you're not comfortable talking numbers and you're an individual, you better learn that really quick.
Yeah.
And if not, you better have a business partner that is.
Find someone who can help you.
Well,
yeah, you would have a partner, or a business partner, or a collaborator that is used to dealing that. Sometimes that's why EPs and line producers and people that have dealt with budget breakdowns for different types of projects really are worth their weight in gold. Some producers, you wouldn't even think of doing certain projects without a really great producer or a project manager.
The 2 things that I've learned to ask are, what's your budget? Which is, and you can ask it in a really kind of
and you say like
way.
I'm not holding you to it. I don't like, but what's your budget?
Yeah,
for this? This is not an obligation.
People are
and you're cool with 50% up front.
Yes.
60.
Yes, at least.
But but they're generally a little shocked when you say what's your budget, because that's not something that people generally ask. They want you to do the target shoot and have everyone.
Well, I don't think people are shocked. I don't think they're shocked about I think in the having done this now several, like I don't even know how many times. It's not that you're shocking them because we're talking. It's a moment of commitment, because the moment you throw out a number, somebody throws out a number, you're calibrating. And so like, you're basically saying like, how committed are you to this? But you're purposely doing that because you're like, how much more are we going to meet and talk about this? That would be the other thing. I would limit the amount of times you meet with someone to like 2 or 3 times before you know it's going to go somewhere.
Going because they're, and you have to gauge them too if they're just trying to pull information.
Right.
You know, you've got to be engaged in that and have your radar tuned to some of this stuff too, because unfortunately there's just some people out there that are just like trying to pull you know, your expertise in that, and then you know some people are good and we're just like, hey, you know, I'll pay you for consultant fee, or they're just
and sometimes then you give it, right? You hand it off. You know,
because you never know. You never know.
I mean, I know people that have actually charged to put together the quote, and then we've actually, Spencer, a long time ago we did that. We said this is such a complex project, it's actually going to take a significant amount of our time just to scope it, to bid it. And the way you structure that is you say we're going to need to be compensated for the time, and it won't be much, you know, it'll be probably under a couple $1,000 or a few $100. And if we decide to do the deal, we'll credit that money towards the bid. So you're basically saying like, it's the same amount of, if you feel good about us and we feel good about you, you'd be paying this money either way. But it's kind of taking it off our backs, because it's going to take a lot of work to R&D to even know enough to be able to fully scope out the project. Those are pretty big projects though.
Don't do it. Most people are not, they're afraid to do that because you know, obviously all this stuff is fear-based. You're afraid that if you go, hey, I don't do spec work for free, or hey, I need this for, you know, for prep and R&D, and you need to have this, you'll also get a good feeling for how, like you said, how serious this person is for this project, how
easy they are to get along with, and how they communicate.
And there's a bunch of red flags that go up when people balk at, you know, at certain things like this. So like, you know, you taking a deposit that you would apply toward the project, I don't see how people could turn away from that. Obviously they're going to see something. That's my rule of thumb. I have rarely done that, but my rule of thumb is if basically the data or the information I'm giving them as a part of the bid is actually valuable to help them understand the problem more, I'm basically already working on your problem. So so like, and so at least in that case, if I give them a bid or a scope of work that they turn around and give to another person or agency or whatever, you know, that's fine. It's a really good tool to have in your belt, because it establishes commitment, but also the likelihood that, again, back to empathy, if you think about it from their side and you're like, wow, these people really put some time into this and gave us this really comprehensive summary of the work to be done. Am I really going to hand that to some other person to say, here's the work I want to have done? It creates a little bit of a loose connection already to the project. This, I mean, we could probably do a whole episode, a whole panel on. We could talk about like, you know, how to budget. I mean, I wouldn't steer away from, you know, relating this to a bit of the sticker shock that happens still in like live mobile AR or even virtual production experiences. There's a lot of sticker shock that people are like, what are you talking about? It's just a game engine and like a bunch of TVs on a wall. And you're like, no. Like, do you know what it costs?
There's a bunch of people who have got like 35 years of experience in that tech.
You're not paying, you know, you're not paying the artist for their capability right now. You're paying them the past 20 some odd years that it took
Yeah,
them to
yeah.
get.
Have you
get all
you
this.
all heard? I'm sure it's been reprocessed and recycled many. But you've heard the old story about the guy with the hammer and the invoice. Have you heard that story? It's like
Probably in a few.
yeah, it's the general version of it is this company has this machine. It's like their primary money maker. It's like this huge, massive piece of equipment, and it breaks down and it stops, and their production stops, and they're not making any money. And they find the one specialist that knows how to work on it. He comes out and looks at it, kind of walks around it, walks up to one little gear, pulls out his ball peen hammer, taps the gear, and then all of a sudden the machine's whirring back to life. Everything's back online. The panic is over, and he sends them an invoice for like $20,000. And they go, "Whoa, wait a minute though. You just hit a gear with a hammer. We're charging you $20,000." And so he said, "Well," and on the invoice it says like it's like hammer. The cost of using the hammer is like $50, and then the 20 years of experience to know which gear to hit with which hammer was $15,000.
Just the right way. And then, I mean, and that's
like the woman who did the logo. It was Travelers
God, yes.
Chase, right, and she drew it on a napkin, and she charged them like $70,000 or something, or $700,000 or whatever, and they were like, "You drew it on a napkin in a meeting." It's like, yeah, it was the same exact thing.
Yeah.
One of the
it's
other
kind of like where
say,
the Nike logo came from.
Oh yeah.
The other side of that, the other piece that I wanted to say, other than what is your budget, is who was the arbiter of taste on this project? Who is my person who I connect with? Who is the arbiter of taste? And this is
who represents your approval? Like who is the primary interface in this relationship?
And I think that Jim, in your in your hierarchy and the kind of teams that you work with, that's usually probably well defined. But in the stuff that Paul and I are doing is not always super defined, and it's really important to everyone who is doing 1099 work to define who that arbiter of taste
and
is.
It's not usually the person that approves the budget or that cuts the check. It's usually not.
Oh, and the person that cuts the check that may be an A&P has nothing to do with the project at all.
They've assumed you've already approved. Like the arbiter of taste is already, like, by the time, like, I assume that you are happy with how this is going, I will cut this check. Like, but you may talk to that person in the process of budgeting and becoming a vendor and all that fun stuff.
That too is why if I'm doing contractor work in terms of like, artist or, directing or whatever it is, I do like to work as close to direct to client as possible. And sometimes you're just part of a larger team and you have to know how to work with on those teams. But individually, like if someone's approaching me, you get a good feel as to like getting right to who's the approval. You kind of know what their tastes are because that's going to funnel into the creative decisions sometimes within that. Yeah. And that can... I've had projects that have gone all the way to final rendered, everything's been delivered, and then somebody else up the chain scraps it.
Yeah.
Because even though they may have been aware, it's a swoop in at the last minute. Stuff's already done. Everything's been approved by the creative directors and everybody else down the line, and it gets up to the CMO, and the CMO is like, I don't like it.
So how do you build your system though, Jim, in order to not get financially
upfront payment?
Upfront payments, man. There's something that somebody like that, when you have, that's what's so important.
No, but you're doing more work. You've already done the work. Now you have to do more work.
Oh, I think he's talking about that. He's done the work, and now they're saying no, we're not going to use it.
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
You have it done in your SOW. Yeah, and if they want more work out of it, you have that stated in the stipulations of like your contract or SOW, which is really good you need to have, a contract lawyer, and maybe not on retainer, but somebody that you can go to and that is familiar with this to look at your contracts for you and go, this is totally biased.
Jim, do you have
We're in close.
Do you have an SOW template that you could send me?
Spencer's law firm is the law firm of Copy and Paste LLC.
Well, my first or I should say my last SOW that I used for a lot of the projects that I still do today, I sent it off to a contract lawyer, and she was like, oh man, this is really good. I don't really have to change too much of it. And she just made a few tweaks that were good. And then anytime I would have something that I thought was big enough for her to look at in terms of like, would it be, working with a big studio or working with a big company, would I go, okay, well, I'm going to fit into my budget how I would also be able to pay her. So it's
money well spent. I mean,
I cannot recommend that enough. Good contract lawyer and a good accountant.
Yep.
Is like, yeah, it costs a shitload of money to have a lawyer, but you're not keeping that person on retainer all the time. You do have to pay them a few $100 an hour when it does come time to use them, but at the end, the money that they can save you is a lot.
Yep.
And
the way I look at it is that is that my accountant makes 75, and we bill out at more than that. So that just, I mean, it makes sense. I work for an hour and I get an hour of the account.
You have to build all this into your. It's never cut and dry for people that are starting out in this or doing this as individual artists or 1099 versus W2. They don't teach you this shit.
No, and you're really establishing a relationship. Like, the best move with an attorney that I've found, like if you have them help you incorporate or do some kind of like the first time you talk to a lawyer is not when you actually need their guidance. The first time when you talk to a lawyer is when you have a pretty mundane thing that you need done, and you're kind of throwing them a bone because they're probably using a template and they're probably just like, it's probably a copy and paste for them, but the liability moves to them on that, and you're establishing a relationship. So when you do need them, like, a quick phone call or a quick gut check, they're
and most
available.
Of them don't charge you nickel and dime. Like, oh, you talk to me for 15 minutes. Here's a bill for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Calculated by my $300 an hour type thing. Most of the cool ones, even from a consultancy level.
Even if though, Jim, I mean, like, that is absolutely money well spent.
Yep.
Well,
totally. And the accountant, like, I mean, I don't get to do TurboTax. I can't do the self-filed stuff, but I have no doubt that she uses software and probably just plugs stuff in, but like, I can email her at any time throughout the year and say, hey, got this thing. Is it better if I do it this way or that way? Or they
email you close to the end of the year and be like, guess what? You need to go shopping. Before the end of the year. You need to buy software to get your deductions.
Yeah, having an accountant and a lawyer is not a bougie thing. It's actually cheaper in the long run, and if anything, it's insurance.
I'm buying a new Mac. I've decided if we get this gig with a local university,
he's going to get an iMac,
buy a Mac
right?
Pro.
No, I'm not buying a Mac Pro. I'm going to buy an iMac Pro, but it's still got the Pro word in it. It's an iMac. But if we get this gig that we're working on that looks like it's going to happen, then but like the way that I buy gear is that I buy gear to do the project, and then the project pays.
Well, so just, I mean, look, by the way, thank you so much for your time, Jim. We're going way over time, but like, I know we have a few, we've doled out this advice over the years, and like, we probably should, like I said, it should probably be a whole other episode about being a creative freelancer or consultant or whatever. But like, just so people know, when you run a business and you run any business really, you file your taxes based on your profitability. And so like if your company, ABC Corp, brings in $100 gross that year through doing work, and then you had to buy like this thing and that thing and that thing, and it cost you $75 to kind of keep the business running, then you really only are paying taxes on the $25. By the way, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a lawyer, but what we're talking about is that like when you especially in our world where you're talking about devices and gear and equipment, you buy that with the
right, which can be which can be a $10,000
yeah.
experience.
So that's the cost of operating your business. So if you can buy that with the company's money, and included in the cost of doing business, if you get established enough, is your salary. So at the end of the year, what you really tell the government is, my company profited $10. Yeah, we billed $100 worth of billings, but we actually had to spend 90 to get it, and so we're going to pay taxes on the 10. So that's why having an accountant is really important, because they can tell you what things are justifiable and make sense for spending pre-tax dollars on, and how to set up yourself. And it's kind of like this technology stuff. It's a little weird to navigate, and that's why you establish a relationship.
You're better off if you learn this stuff too, because people will go like, what's your P&L? And most artists are like, what the hell is P&L? It's profit cash sheet. It's like how much did you really make? Like, what's your gross income? Because that's usually when you're applying for loans and you're trying to grow the business outside of being, a 1099 artist pretending to be a bigger studio, to actually get growth. Like, most people don't know that they should probably look into things like Gusto or anything to handle the 1099s of subcontractors that they would use. Like, owning and running a business, and as an individual artist or consultant or whatever it is that you are, versus getting to be a startup where you guys were, of like taking in some VC funding and growing the team. Like, running that stuff is is another whole job into itself.
Yep.
Versus like the artist side and the creative side of like actually the nitty gritty and like making these pieces of software or these content pieces or stuff for museums and education and all that.
Well, and it's hard to like wrap your head around trying to go from the left brain to the right brain kind of quickly.
Well, and also there's nobody's your advocate, right? So like if you're if you're making I think as an independent artist, if you're bringing in the order of thousands of dollars, let's say $5,000 a year from your creative work, if you are not structurally managing that money and spending, like look at it this, let's say you're a painter, and you, out of commissions, you get $5,000 a year off your creative work. If you're buying paint, brushes, and canvas, and you're running that as a sole proprietor, that $1,000 or that $5,000 is like going to waste, versus like if you just slightly structure it differently, where that $5,000 is actually going into a little corporation that you had set up, and you're buying the paint, canvas, and brushes with the corporation's money, like the same $5,000 to you net could mean the difference between like a couple $100 and a couple $1,000, just in the way that you move the money. And that's what an accountant's for. Yeah. I mean, it's simple as that. Yeah. And it's not that weird. But there's nobody that's going to stop you and say, hey, Spencer's probably heard me do this several times. We'll talk to somebody that's like, oh, I'm doing some freelance, and I'm like, are you set up as an S corp or like what? And then like, or a sole proprietor. And anytime I hear like, oh, just like, I'm just depositing it in my personal checking and I got sole proprietor, I'm just like, the minute you go over a couple $100 of that, you need to think about investing and structuring.
You can't write off the equipment that you're buying.
That's what I mean. That's
yeah, if you need to buy, an HTC Vive, or you want to buy some of the stuff to get into XR or virtual production, and you're doing it from your individual account versus, setting up as LLC or an S corp, even for an individual, as a corporation or as a single proprietorship, you have a little bit of protection, and obviously you can talk to a lawyer about which way is better for you depending on your business for S corp versus LLC. But at the end of at the end of the year, when it comes tax time, your laptop, your Wacom tablet, your HTC Vive, your Sony A7S, your all of that stuff, any of the education classes that you would do in terms of like learning Unreal, or paying stuff on like Learn Square or FXPhD or any of these Patreon things, like you can all apply that to the business instead of like how you would do it as an individual.
Yeah.
Because you can't write that stuff off as an individual. You get capped at the education stuff you could do. And you can take depreciation on that stuff for a number of years based off the business.
Yeah.
And it becomes write-off, because you could go, hey, I bought this Vive because I wanted to learn more about VR and learning how to dev for this, or I bought this iPhone because I wanted to learn ARKit. Like, you may never get to do that project, but you could still write
it's justifiable. It's defensible. Yeah, I mean, well, that's what I mean. Like, if someone billed $5,000 in a year doing creative work for hire, and they just took it in, then immediately the government says, well, you made $5,000 as a person. You're probably in the 25 or 20 something % tax bracket. So like you're going to net, let's say, $4,000 off of that, versus, I took in $5,000. I bought a new iPad. I bought a piece of software. I bought this course, and like, hey, as a business, after I did my cost of doing business, I only profited like $1,000, and then the government's going to say, oh, well, you only owe us like the 20-30% on the $1,000. So it means the difference between paying $300 in taxes versus $1,500 in taxes, and you still, at the end of the day, you still get this stuff covered. I mean, that is really what it boils down to. And the only difference is that you have an entity and a bank account that the money runs through first, and you have an accountant that helps you make sure you file that stuff properly. That's why it's totally worth it, because then you might make $10,000. And by the way, that disparity between that few $100 and that $1,000 gets wider the more money you're making each year. So do it. Get an accountant and a lawyer.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this is the thing that obviously we dovetailed into a lot of the business stuff, which it does as artists, as individual, studios or companies like that. I mean, this is part of the whole XR virtual production.
Yeah. Well, we're all little independent businesses, like doing this.
Yeah, we're not. We may work for the big guys, but we are not. We are not Warner Brothers. We're not ILM. We're not Pixar. We're not.
No, we're not.
Yeah.
We may get brought into them, but at the end of the day, they're just going to go, hey, either you guys are, giving us a W-9, or, you're not a W-2, in terms of your tax filing, because you're not an employee. So it's like, it's just cut and run. They're just like, we don't want to deal with the tax for you. You deal with the taxes. So it's like, you have to figure that stuff into your budgeting. You do these projects too, because you go, I've got to pay for the accountant. I've got to pay for the lawyer. I've got to pay for the equipment, and I've being at some of these bigger companies, and then going, on my own too, or partnering and collaborating with people. And this was stuff that I was like, I didn't learn this in high school. I didn't learn this in college. Like, I didn't. Half of this is like street smarts, kind of getting the shit beat out of you on the streets of Hard Knocks, so to speak. And I've totally screwed things up sometimes, in terms of like, man, I should have been smarter on this.
We all pay that first year, a couple years of taxes. We're like, oh, there's a better way to do this.
Yeah. I mean, you learn on this stuff, and it is, kind of crazy, but it's you. I mean, like, back to the guy with the hammer. You learn this stuff over years of, good experiences and bad experiences. Just like you learn a lot of these tools, you kind of, the big thing too is like you gotta spend the time to invest in yourself to learn about.
Yeah, and this is the business side's a part of it too. I mean, and so Steve, S corp. I don't know. So corporations are actually a state thing, so it varies from state to state. So I can't speak a lot to Oregon in particular, but S corps is generally recommended that you run a payroll, even if it's minimal. But there's so many great resources now for running, Jim already mentioned Gusto. And by the way, an LLC can usually, depending on the state, can always be elected to an S corp. So you can always start an LLC and you can always convert it over. So and an LLC is so cheap to file that like there's really no excuse. Like get a LLC and a bank account. I've got the same bank account and corporate bank account and articles of incorporation I filed in 2007. And even though I've had full-time jobs, I've done all kinds of different stuff, it's been so handy to have that for those little moments where either I go back to full-time consulting or there's a side gig or whatever. And yeah, I can't file through TurboTax or what, I can't do the 1040 easy,
you have to pay
but
a little more.
It's always been worth it. It's always been worth it. So
yeah, as long as it's not a conflict of interest to the company you may be working with on the day, like if you're an actual employee versus, that's all you have to do is just, check in with things and just go, yeah, no conflict of interest here. It's cool. Non-competing consulting or whatever.
So I've never had any company have a problem with the fact that I have a little company off to the side. And in fact, I would say every job I've taken in the past 10 years, in almost every employment agreement, there's a section for you to fill out, like intellectual property and things that your new employer can't lay claim to. Don't ever be don't ever be afraid to put like, so my little corporation is called Blast Off Inc. And so I'd be like any client work or projects originated by Blast Off Inc. And then you're covered. And then any work you do or have done, your employer can't lay claim to it. So, just be confident in that stuff.
I had to declare all that stuff going into GoPro or any.
Yeah, you got to.
At Apple or Autodesk or any of them.
You got to just in case, because you never know what it could be. You did a project 5 years ago, and now the company wants to come back and pay you or buy you out from it, and you don't want your employer laying claim on it. So anyway, so I don't. We've run long. I'm hearing lots of noise and echo from somewhere.
That's because I just got next to my.
Is that a Rolls-Royce Trent engine in your office?
The Cessna.
Yep.
There you go. The Black & Decker Cessna.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I
we could keep going.
A good cut spot.
Yeah. But hopefully people got some out of it.
Yeah. And honestly, the thing that we kind of hit on here, other than virtual production and just general XR was how to run how to run your XR business.
A creative business.
I mean, like this is something that or a creative business. I mean, like this is something that we haven't really talked about too much, and has been a huge piece for both you and I, Paul. Like in our lives doing this stuff. Like it feels like this might be a really good space to bring in.
Oh, we should get Michael Leventhal. He was the general counsel for Magic Leap when we started, and he now works at a law firm where he's kind of focusing in the space. He'd probably be great for that.
And I got my contract lawyer.
Yeah.
She comes from media and entertainment, representing some.
Maybe we should do a panel. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that would be really informative for people. Because that's one thing that's going to change. Like all the creative stuff and the tools may change for us over time, but it's like,
dude,
everybody's
This
got to pay
well, like
taxes.
so Spencer and I, when we first started doing this as independent, like we had both arrived at the same corporate structure and the way we ran the business. He was on the West Coast, I was on the East Coast, and we were talking. I was like, yeah, I'm actually, yeah, my accountant said to do the same, and yeah, I'm doing the same. And that we both, like, Spencer's only recently reincorporated into Oregon, but like up until then, we've been operating on the same corporate and tax structure for 10 years, you know, and it's like, so like, yeah, especially when you're in the early days of you're only making maybe a couple $1,000 and all of a sudden you're looking at spending a couple $1,000 on an attorney and an accountant, but like it over the long run, it's so worth it. It's so worth it. It gives you confidence. You know, it represents you professionally. There's just so many positive benefits to it.
It gives you a little cachet too when you're talking to possible clients. You know, you're like, well, my CPA says this,
and
you know,
and protect and some protection.
If the CPA has to step in for you, if your lawyer has to step in, if things go south, which unfortunately sometimes things like that can happen. And if you need someone to protect you, that's who you're paying.
Yep.
That's
well, it's insurance.
We generally don't do work in LA, but yeah.
Estella says, media and contract lawyer, yes, please, in all caps. So that's probably.
So that ties back to it is that I got introduced to my media and contract lawyer through my friend Jake, who worked on Oblivion.
Oh, so nice. There we go. Sorry.
Oh, nice.
Well, and actually, yeah, and that's another thing. Talk to people that are a little bit further down the road than you, that they've already tried out a few accountants and lawyers, and like recommendations and referrals. And like a lot of times, especially if you have pretty simple questions, like the question Steve had about like, do you have to run payroll or not for an S corp? And he had said later in the chat that he had gotten that guidance from an accountant, but like you can always bounce that. I don't know of any accountant that if you're like, hey, your client so-and-so, or they make a warm introduction and you say, I'm just curious about this one little quick question. It's usually not a big deal. Just like if somebody asks you about your expertise, you
have people that contact you all the time that are
just quick questions,
trying to like pull all the information, but you just have these little things, and it's like those feelers of like, could you collaborate with them? And they're trying to see like where your expertise is, or would you be someone that they could collaborate with? So you have those conversations where it's not like a serious business call or something like that. It's just those feelers that happen, and sometimes they don't work out.
That needs to be okay. All right.
Well, you guys, we are the longest.
We might have set a new record.
Yes.
I think there's
dinner.
I only took one bathroom break. Yeah, the dinner is.
I didn't take
dinner is cooking. Yes, both of you get better credit than I do.
My laptop has tanned my kneecaps because it's
humming. It's humming.
I went through so many shades and shifts of the sun on the back porch right now that I'm back in the shade.
I was noticing the lighting was.
Well, how do I know you guys aren't just in an LED volume?
Which was. Yeah.
I know. Hopefully Disney doesn't come.
No. Well, I already moved the mouse ears from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen, so I think we're okay.
That's right. Now we're digging balls.
No, come on. That's another conversation. All right. Thanks. By the way, everybody in the chat, Todd, Estella, Cami, saw Engage VR. Thanks so much
for hanging in.
Yeah. Jim, thank you so much. Ton of good info and good backstory.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Probably I say this every time. We're definitely going to start recycling guests because there's a lot of great conversations that we want to keep having. So.
There'll be big news. I'm sure. Hopefully, we'll all have big news, and we'll be able to meet up like Basilisk in person and get some crazy fried chicken sandwiches again.
Exactly.
I am looking forward to the post-COVID-19 after.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, in the meantime,
might have to wait a few months for that.
Yeah, I think I'll just see you guys online.